even though I have to fit in a classroom.
Could you use your microphone so they can hear us?
I just wanted to remind everybody that the meeting will begin soon. We're waiting for 2 people, maybe 3. I'm going to call the meeting to order for SACOG Thursday, December 5th, 2024, and it is 10:09. Welcome.
We decided to close 12th from November 2024 to 26.
Wow.
Years.
Glad you're here. All right, we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Josh Chapman, would you please lead us in the pledge? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll have roll call.
Thank you. Good morning. Director Branscombe,
Yes, ma'am.
Chapman. Early for Guerrero, absent. Howdeshelt, absent. Jennings.
Here.
Joyner,
Here.
Sander, absent. Vice Chair Gog, absent. Vice Chair Lauren. Chair Bradford,
Here.
and ex officio member Fong for Aceves.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, this is a time in the meeting where we'll take public comment for anyone who would like to address the committee on any items that are not on the agenda today. And we have one public comment card that has come forward for Jeffrey Tartagia. Thank you.
Good morning, board. Jeff Tartagia as an advocate. What I'm here to comment, last time I asked the question about how you report to the public, how the information from SACOG gets transmitted. This time I'm wondering, for the members that are absent, do they ever put in a written comment? It obviously is never read in public, but just wondering if indeed that feature of when you have absentees, do they, in a sense, I know they can look at the YouTube and see what happened at the meetings going on, because that's often what I have done in the past. But I just bring that up for transportation of how do you transport your information of what goes on to the public, and what items possibly go through and happen. That's my public comment. Would like to encourage you to see that your Board of Supervisors and other entities know not just what you're doing, but also what things to anticipate for the future. It's just a comment and suggestion.
Thank you very much for your comment today. We don't usually give any reply or response to something that's not agendized. So is there any other public comment today?
There's no other public comment.
All right, well, we will adjourn this is so weird for me, the SACOG meeting, and then we'll also move to the CVR Safe Committee meeting. So SACOG adjourned. All right. I'm going to call to order the CVR Safe Committee meeting for Thursday, December 5th at 10 a.m. And do we need to state who's here again, or it's the same?
We'll note for the record that CVR Safe Directors Young and Rickman are absent.
All right. We'll now move to public comment for the CVR agenda. Do we have any public comment online or in person today?
There's no public comment.
All right, we'll move to the consent calendar. These are minutes of the September 5th, 2024 committee meeting. We have a motion.
Second.
Second by Joyner. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstained? Oh, who's opposed? I'm sorry, we got.
Nope,
That was
not
Chair
opposed.
Bradford.
Sorry, I was a little late.
That's okay. I might have been a little fast. All right, thank you. We have an action item on the calendar, and this is the amendment to fiscal year budget, and Barbara von Bechtold will be addressing the item.
All right, good morning, everybody. Barbara von Bechtold. I'm the program manager for the Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways, otherwise known as CVR Safe, because it's much shorter and easier to say. CVR Safe is comprised of El Dorado, Sacramento, San Joaquin, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. And the revenues for the CVR Safe are collected through a $1 fee that's assessed at the time of vehicle registration in those participating counties. So in our item today, staff have worked with our call box maintenance contractor, they're called Nightscope, to address increases in costs for their services. The current call box maintenance contract was approved in 2020, and since that time, costs have increased substantially. Staff negotiated with Nightscope regarding these increased costs and agreed to changes in our contract to control the proposed cost increases for the CVR Safe call box system. If approved, the CVR Safe budget for fiscal year 24-25 would increase by just over $159,000. And our current contract with Nightscope would also be amended to reflect those changes I just mentioned. And the additional cost to keep our call box system both maintained and also operational for users. And further, based on previous board direction that we've gotten from the CVR Safe board and our approved CVR Safe strategic plan, staff are going to return in early 2025 to both the committee and board for potential scenarios for call box reductions so we can maintain the fiscal health of the CVR Safe going forward. So today I'm requesting that the CVR Safe committee recommend to the CVR Safe board to approve the amendment to the fiscal year 24-25 CVR Safe budget, reflecting the increased cost for call box maintenance services, and delegate authority to the executive director to amend the contract with our call box maintenance provider Nightscope to reflect those current costs. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Directors, do we have any questions on this item? Director Branscombe.
What is the total revenue,
The total revenue for,
projected
Yes.
revenue? Because you're discussing costs.
yes,
And
and
I apologize, I didn't get a chance to go over any.
no, that's
supporting
okay. For this current year, for CVR Safe, it's just about $2.8 million would be the expected revenue for the program.
And the cost profile is primarily what?
It's mainly made up of the core call box programs like the actual call box on the side of the road,
Sure.
our 511 system, freeway service patrol, the call box, there's an answering service that we use to answer those calls that come in through both 511 and the call boxes, those types of things.
Got it. And the increase was related to a consulting firm that helps us, or is it the management team, or what is that?
The request actually came from our contractor due to the vast increase in costs that they've seen over the last 4 years to actually send people out to maintain and repair the call boxes in our
Operating
system.
expenses. Okay,
Yeah, and I had laid some of those out in the staff report. There are things like fuel, labor, insurance. A lot of those have gone up like 25% or more.
and I
the
presume
last
staff
4
has looked at this and determined they're reasonable?
Yes, and that's also why we had some contract
you.
costs too.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
So
Finance.
Barbara, I'm gonna go ahead and support this, but I won't be here when you get to take a look at this again next year. In the last 5 years, technology has advanced remarkably, Starlink among many others. So the possibility of eliminating a lot of these physical call boxes,
Mhm.
I would assume you're gonna look really hard at.
Yes, we definitely are. And what we've looked at previously and we've done, since we removed a lot of call boxes about 6 years ago, is we replaced a lot of those boxes with sides that say 511 roadside assist. Because basically people can call our 511 system toll free and talk to the same people they would talk to if they need roadside assistance on the physical call boxes.
Right.
So that technology is there, and also the proliferation of cell phones, just in general, across all income levels, age and everything is so high at this point that that would be a reasonable mitigation for removing the call boxes.
My memory is that there were some blind spots with respect to cell service. Those should have been well resolved by now.
A lot of those, if you look along the highways, that's where most of the expansion has been, and that's where all of our call boxes are, along the highways and freeways in our region.
Thank you. Any other director questions, clarifying questions? We'll move to public comment. Is there any public comment on the item?
There's no public comment.
All right, seeing no public comment, I'm going to ask for a motion to
Motion to approve the item.
support the staff. All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Bradford will second.
All right, we have Bradford and Jennings seconding the item. Choose your person. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, abstain? Motion passes. Seeing, thank you.
Forgive me, do we need to do a roll call since we've got?
Well, we have an additional person from the CRV Safe Online that might not have been, no, we already had
We moved
Gary.
Gary there.
Yeah, we had Gary. All right. Seeing no other matters, I'm going to adjourn the CVR meeting.
Do you,
Let's go
Lauren.
back and do that
Oh,
by
wait.
roll call vote, just because we do
Okay,
have people
we're going to
participating
do a
remote.
roll call vote on the item. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman, Early for Guerrero, absent, Howdeshelt, absent, Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Sander, absent, Vice Chair Gog, absent, Vice Chair Lauren,
Yes.
Chair Bradford,
Aye.
the motion carries.
All right. Now we'll move on and adjourn this meeting and begin our call to order our SACOG meeting. It's a lot. All right. We're going to begin with our consent calendar. And that will be the minutes of the September 5th, 2024 committee meeting.
Move the minutes.
Is there a second? Jennings? All right. Do we need a roll call vote for this item?
Yes, Vice Chair Lauren, we'll do
Okay.
that for the meeting.
All right. Thank you.
Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman, Early for Guerrero, absent, Howdeshelt, absent, Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Sander, absent, Vice Chair Gog, absent, Vice Chair Lauren,
Aye.
and Chair Bradford.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Motion carries. All right, we have our action items for today. The first is amendment to fiscal year 2024-25 budget. For CRV Safe, and we already did that, sorry. I'm on the wrong page. All right. This is the action item for Caltrans Service Memorandum and Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority. presented by Kathleen Hanley. Hi.
Yeah, good morning, SACOG Transportation Committee. I'm Kathleen Hanley. I'm a principal planner on your transportation team here at SACOG. Item 2 is an action item. We are requesting that the SACOG Transportation Committee recommend that the board accept the Caltrans Services Memorandum, adding it as an addendum to the joint exercise of powers agreement for the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority. Many of you will recall that in January, when we formed CARTA, the tolling authority, the SACOG board gave direction that there should be language added to the agreement to state that Caltrans must put in writing the commitments that it was making verbally to the SACOG board on what they were going to provide in exchange for the voting seat. The JPA agreement gave Caltrans 180 days to provide that written commitment. They met that 180-day requirement, providing the original version in May. CARTA staff and the partner agencies have been working with Caltrans to get the memo more clarified, add more specific detail. The CARTA board provided some feedback on the memo. And what you see before you is the final signed version of Caltrans's written agreement. It has already previously been approved by the CARTA board and by the YOLO Transportation District Board. So the action before the SACOG board this month is the final approval action required for this addendum to the joint exercise of powers agreement. So again, we're requesting that the Transportation Committee recommend approval to the board. Staff feel that the memo is sufficiently detailed, given that it's predicting a lot of things in the future that are uncertain, and that it's responsive to the requests regarding the commitments that Caltrans is making that SACOG requested. So happy to take any questions about the details. Thank you.
Do the directors have questions? Director Branscombe.
Thank you. What, if any, is the budget impact on CARTA?
We anticipate in the positive direction that Caltrans's commitments to CARTA will save CARTA more than $5 million in the first 5 years of operating YOLO 80 conservatively.
Has CARTA put forth a 5-year forecast of financial forecast on their operations?
No, so CARTA has recently gotten a consultant under contract. They started work in September to develop a multi-year work plan and budget for CARTA to do just that. At the same time, YOLO Transportation District is leading a study to clarify and provide more detail on projected revenue from the toll facility itself. So a lot of that will come into detail over the next year through 2025.
I view this organization as an emerging, really big something. And so I think there should be, now recall that SACOG, don't we have a significant impact on the population of their board?
That's right. SACOG currently has 2 voting seats on CARTA. Right now, the voting structure has 1 at-large seat for SACOG and 1 seat for every county that has a toll
That's what I
facility.
recall, something
Yeah.
along those lines. And therefore, I think it incumbent, obviously, the decisions will be made there, but I think it incumbent on SACOG to have a watchful eye on their financial forecast, and particularly overhead costs, which sometimes it can get out of hand, but also with respect to if and when there are excess revenues, profits, whatever you want to call it, what will they be used for? And that can be a real important question. I mean, well, there can be real questions about that. And so I think there needs to be a clear understanding of exactly what any excess revenues would be targeted for.
I couldn't agree more that SACOG needs to keep a keen eye on the activities of CARTA as they relate to our region. And your staff's doing just that. The discussions on exactly what will happen with excess toll revenue will happen once we have a better estimate, probably in the 2026, 2027 timeframe. The state law is pretty specific about exactly what you can use it for and how clear you have to be about the waterfall and what revenues go where. So CARTA will have to go through that exercise at that point. And staff are happy to provide those updates to the SACOG Transportation Committee and board when that stuff comes through.
And I make these comments not with any suspicion or overly concerned, because we know the people and the good people. It's just that I was in venture capital business for a long time, and the first financial forecast is key to setting the discipline required to be successful. And so I presume that management team is coming together. They're not really ready to make that kind of forecast yet.
So currently CARTA is not independently staffed. So SACOG is serving as the staff for CARTA for this initial year. CARTA's sort of day-to-day management executive structure is a technical advisory committee, which is formed by the executive directors of all the members. So James Corliss, Autumn Bernstein, Matt Click, Kevin Busey, all get together and discuss the overall direction of CARTA as
It's a
we
startup.
initiate this. Yeah,
It's a startup.
Yeah.
Exactly how are they getting their seed capital? I forgot that.
we are working that out. SACOG has made an
Okay,
initial
okay,
loan.
we're,
Yeah.
we're in that stage. I get it.
We're at
I
that
get it.
stage,
Thank you
yeah.
very much.
Mhm.
Appreciate that.
Really appreciate your questions. Bruce Hudeshelt has arrived, and we are on action item, number 2.
Yeah, and I appreciate Mr. Branscome's questions. I was listening as I was traversing the construction zone on 160 on the way in.
All right.
Good job.
Any other questions? Yeah, Director Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair Lauren. I would just, as a member on the CARTA board, appreciate the questions and just want to thank Kathleen and James and your team for the work that you've been doing with us as we get this up and going. A lot of these questions, right, we formed that, I think back in, is it July? Is when the CARTA board, it's not even a year old. So we've been doing a lot of work on that, working closely with Autumn and the folks there to kind of dovetail this work together. And I can't thank the SACOG staff enough for their work that they're doing and keeping a keen eye on and walking us through this, because it's the first in this area, and it's been a pleasure to work with them, and hopefully we can keep you guys on longer. Thanks.
All right. If there aren't any other director comments, I'd like to take public comment on the item.
There's no public comment.
All right.
Move
Seeing,
the item.
all right, item has been moved by Mr. Branscombe. Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Seconded by Director Chapman.
And then can I just make one more comment, please?
Yes,
Sorry, just
sorry.
before you do it. I want to thank Greg Wong, who's not here and represents from Caltrans.
Oh, he's here.
Oh, is Greg still here?
Oh,
Where
yeah.
is he? Oh, there he is. Thank you, Greg, and your team. I know we kind of pushed this back and punted and asked you to do some projections on cost savings that were hard to nail down. And it took a bit to get this to us here today. And we supported this unanimously at our YTD board meeting last month. And just again, want to thank you and your team for being flexible and nimble and getting this to where we were all able to get it over the finish line. So thank you.
And although there's a motion and a second on the floor, did you want to add anything, Mr. Fong? All right. We'll have a roll call vote on the item.
Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman, Early Forgetto absent, Howdeshelt,
Yes.
Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Sander absent, Vice Chair Gog absent, Vice Chair Lauren,
Yes.
and Chair Bradford.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
All right, motion carries. We'll be moving on now to item number 3 on the action calendar, authorizing submittal of proposed strategic partnerships planning grant for the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority. And yes, we'll have you again. All right.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lauren. Keeping the CARTA theme moving here, item 3 is also an action item. We're requesting that the Transportation Committee recommend that the board authorize the executive director to submit a strategic partnerships planning grant application on behalf of CARTA. So the CARTA board has directed their staff to develop a grant application for a competitive annual grant program that Caltrans runs called the Sustainable Planning Grant Program. There are 2 types. One is called strategic partnerships. That planning grant is focused on planning studies that work closely with Caltrans. At CARTA, we have Caltrans right at the table, so we definitely fit the bill on a planning activity that works well with Caltrans. The specific scope that CARTA would like to move forward is a regional toll equity study. This is directly responsive to a lot of comments we've heard at all the partners boards and with the public that we need a better understanding of how the future toll system, both YOLO 80 in the near term and other toll facilities that we project in the blueprint, will affect low income and other disadvantaged communities and households in our region. So the proposed regional toll equity study will do analysis on those impacts, analyze how other regions have handled similar issues, both in tolling and in other financed infrastructure like parking and other places where we see regions offering discounts for folks. The toll equity study will also provide a framework of options of ways we could potentially increase the equity of CARTA's toll programs through things like transit subsidies or mobility wallets or discounts. But we'll do all that with an understanding that our facility is going to run with a very lean budget, as Director Branscombe has been getting at earlier today. And so we really need to look at what equity programs we can afford to have and how can we kind of do the most good with what we project CARTA's revenues to be. So the reason this is before the SACOG board is because this planning grant program requires that the applications actually be submitted by the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And so SACOG is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for this area. And so the request is for SACOG to carry the grant application for CARTA. And then if CARTA is successful, it would be a pass through. So SACOG would pass through the funds for CARTA and they would be responsible for procurement. Happy to take any questions.
I really enjoy your explanation, Kathleen. Thank you so much. Do we have questions? We do, Director Brands.
Has CARTA established when I say mission, I don't mean some broad-based mission statement. I'm talking about a targeted mission such that not so much lean, so that the budget and everything they do is very disciplined towards a target. And so what is the end state they're looking for?
So CARTA,
Pardon, go ahead.
yeah, so CARTA has not adopted a mission and goals. This is actually something that the consultants CARTA just hired in September have told us is an issue that we need to resolve. So that's something I'm going to be looking to guide the CARTA board through in early 2025 so that CARTA is prepared to make the kinds of trade-off decisions it needs to make on revenue versus congestion benefit versus equity versus customer service, sort of how all of these issues overlap and what CARTA's priorities are. So at this point, no.
I hope it's a one sentence and not too long a sentence.
Understood.
Description of what their end state is. It'll be easier to manage when you know exactly what you're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Lauren,
Chair
if I
Budushel.
might,
Yes.
so will this study look at direct and indirect and financial and non-financial equity metrics?
That's right. Attachment A to the staff report has a proposed scope of work. And so you'll see it include in the framework where the recommendations will likely live. We want to look at things like, how do we make our toll prices easy to understand? That's a type of equity activity we could do. How do we make sure that we're offering essential materials in certain languages so that there's equity and access? How do we, everything from on system, how CARTA operates as an organization and how the partners interact, where the toll revenue goes, should there be equity considerations in that? So the study will look at all those options and make recommendations on what makes sense for CARTA.
If I might.
Go ahead.
So there may be benefit indirectly to those who are using the system, to those who are not using the system, and those who may be in a classification of disadvantaged community or underserved. And that's what I was driving at is, looking at that, right? There will be folks that will be able to, utilize the system to the maximum. And if I remember correctly, I think there's also money in this system for CCJPA. But I was really looking at the indirect aspects of it, where it may improve the quality of life for those who can't afford to be in those lanes.
I understand what you're saying. That's what we see in other regions. Both we see folks of all income levels using a toll lane, right? Because sometimes the financial penalty that you pay for being late for work or picking up your child late for childcare outweighs the cost for the toll. And then in general, the congestion relief and the accelerated reliability of transit and other modes can provide benefits.
Yeah, I don't know if that's what they were doing on 12th Street, creating but yeah, certainly quality of life would have improved.
Direct benefit.
I just want to comment that it's always a good thing to get people back to their families faster and safer. And I think that's what we're doing here. Do we have any other comments? Do we have any public comment?
There's no public comment.
All right, I will look for a motion. So moved by Director Chapman.
I'll second it, even though.
All
we're
right.
not- Well, then directly.
All right,
I'll second.
seconded by Director Hudishell, and we'll have roll call vote.
Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman, Early Figueroa absent, Haudashelt,
Yes.
Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner,
Aye.
Sander absent, Vice Chair Gog absent, Vice Chair Lauren, Chair Bradford.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Vice Chair Lauren,
Yes.
just to wrap that, and appreciate the questions and the discussion on this. Just to, as we are closing out the calendar year and looking at next year. Number one, we will definitely be back in front of the SACOG board, right? The Transportation Full Board on CARTA and the progress towards this, because I know there's a lot of interest for those of you that are not the SACOG representatives on CARTA. So first of all, I see us having to do work next year, not just with CARTA, but with the board, the region, the public, right? Holding a workshop with the SACOG board, but other kinds of work just on, we have it is quite remarkable that we've created this, as Director Branscombe said, startup in a record amount of time. We had to do that, right? Because we had certain deadlines to meet, but we don't have a toll facility in this region, right? This is all brand new. So you'll be prepared. We won't be silent on this. We're going to be coming back to you quite a bit. And I just want to emphasize what Kathleen said. There's some really important and interesting learnings from the other regions that have done toll facilities on equity, on sort of who uses, who benefits. So just sort of stay tuned for that. That is going to be part of your larger transportation agenda next year.
Excellent. Thank you for your comments, James. We're going to be moving to mobility zones, equity priority, community also. Kathleen Hand?
Yeah, it's a Kathleen Palooza today.
Yes, it is.
Item 4 is I'm excited for. It's my first major action on this very large project called Mobility Zones. So I'm going to walk you through a lengthy but interesting presentation on how we've developed the map that I'm asking you to recommend approval for today. So ultimately, what we're driving towards is that the Transportation Committee recommend that the board adopt this map of equity priority communities that has been developed by SACOG staff in partnership with the project's advisory committees and task force. I'll get into a little bit on how the project's advisory committees are structured, but really want to highlight that this has been a collaborative activity, and you're really seeing the work of a lot of folks and their input into this ultimate map before you today. For the presentation, I'll provide some context and background, really focusing on, what is this Mobility Zones project and why are we developing a new method to map equity? I'm sure you all have seen and your staffs have used different maps to look at equity for grant applications and other purposes, but we've developed a new one for this project and I want to explain to you why. Then I'll talk about the methodology, sort of how did we go about doing the analysis to get to this map? And of course, the next steps, how will this map be used? What does the decision to recommend approval of this map mean for the rest of the project? I want to make a note on visuals. So this project analysis was done at the census block group level. Census block groups are sort of arbitrary shapes drawn by the US Census that are roughly the same in population size. On the left, you're looking at sort of a screenshot of the very congested 160 and 80 that directors Joyner and Haudashelt had coming downtown this morning. But it's sort of very distracting. So rather than continue to show you maps of census block groups, I'm using this arbitrary visual on the left of this series of hexagons to explain how we're doing map analysis at the mapping level. So throughout my presentation, you'll see this collection of hexagons, and you should be picturing like a city or a place with each of the hexagons representing a census block group. So data is showing up in some areas and not others. I'm also going to make a note on detail. I'm going to strive to keep this pretty high level for y'all, but I'll note that attachment B to the staff report is a detailed methodology on exactly how this analysis was done. So if things like that formula and series of variables on the right are of interest to you or your staff or anyone watching online, please head into the methodology or feel free to ask any questions of me on kind of the more detailed pieces here. But I'm not going to talk to you in this language. Just want to note that it's there if you need it. Sure.
I am curious because this is the equation
Yeah.
that leads to your answer.
Yeah.
And if we've got the time, could you just kind of click down and describe each of those criteria?
So my presentation is structured to explain the equation to you in plain terms. What I'm saying is if you would like to read it as a report and look at the actual
In
equations,
the
you're
report,
able to
it's
do
just
that.
that
Okay.
you've got composite score for block group. These, that's coded language. Yeah, every specialty is an assault on the lay tongue, and you whip me.
Yes, if I could, I've structured the presentation to really use lay language. So
Okay.
if you'll let me, I'd like to get to the end and then I'm happy to come back to this if it's still not making sense to you.
Go for it.
Okay. All right, so in terms of context and background on the project, so Mobility Zones is a 3-year project that's funded by a federal RAISE grant that really has 2 main phases. The first is focused on defining about 10 community-sized areas that we'll call mobility zones. And then the second half of the project is focused on improving travel within those 10 places that we've chosen. We are halfway through the first phase. So the first step towards defining those 10 or so places is identifying what are the parts of the region that have the highest equity need. I'm going to come back to you early in 2025 to move us towards those 10 places by layering more information on top of it. And then through 2025 and 2026, we'll get into understanding the needs in each place, what projects, ultimately prioritizing and moving some of those projects forward. But today's conversation is really about that step 1, about mapping equity for the purposes of the project. How we're getting down to those roughly 10-ish places in a very large and diverse 6-county region is starting with that step 1 of mapping where the equity needs are within the region. Then we're doing a similar analysis of mapping what the transportation needs are across our region, overlapping those 2 maps to understand where equity needs and transportation needs overlap or are nearby each other. And those places are really the ones that we're going to focus on as potentially being mobility zones, those 10 or so places that we want to prioritize in early 2025. But today, I'm just bringing you step 1 of this process, just the equity needs, and the recommendation is just on this first step.
Make sure I understand, when you say transportation needs, that's both transit, active transportation.
Crashes, pavement condition.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good question.
Okay, in developing a way to map equity for this project, I reflected a lot on feedback that I've received directly from you on my previous staff reports and also discussions this committee and the board have had regarding equity. I've heard a lot about how different communities across our region really see equity differently. So I really want to focus on developing a methodology that had diverse community input into the process and that was flexible enough to reflect the fact that different parts of our region feel really differently about this topic. I've also heard that in a lot of your communities, you have job centers and commercial centers that aren't well reflected in equity metrics because they're not where places where people live. They're places where they work or shop. And so I also wanted to make sure that the methodology accounted for places where people travel to, so that we were sort of having a comprehensive understanding of where equity origins and destinations are within our region. Also really wanted to make sure there was appropriate regional representation for as many of the jurisdictions as possible. We have a lot of experience with some existing equity metrics. I'll walk you through some of them in this presentation, but oftentimes they favor one part of the region over another based on what they're measuring. So really trying to make this as regionally equitable as possible in developing this methodology. So I looked at previous existing and very common ways of mapping equity. They're shown on the left side here. At the federal level, we have the Justice 40 communities. State of California has the 2 most commonly adopted metrics, disadvantaged communities and low-income communities. And SACOG ourselves, we have adopted environmental justice areas from our last plan. And so in the column side here, you'll see the sort of key metrics I've been looking at, which are, does it have community input? Does it account for destinations? And how good of a job does it do at measuring equity needs across our whole region? So I did an evaluation. Attachment A to this staff report includes a table that shows the regional representation piece. So for each of these metrics, basically, does it have a zone in every jurisdiction in our region? And so what you'll see is that some are better than others at meeting these goals, but none are perfect. And so really wanting to develop a methodology that could tick these 3 boxes, that had the community input, that accounted for destinations, and that had good regional representation.
And those, I'm sorry, those
Please.
colors are like a stoplight, right?
They're exactly like a stoplight. Yeah, red, no, yellow, kind of, green, yes.
Green means go.
Are there different colors of green? Or that's not, I was like,
I intended for them to be the same color of green. I could have also gotten that wrong.
That's a different committee.
Okay, so let's talk about how the team did that. When I say the team that developed this, I want to remind you all briefly the complicated but important structure that Mobility Zones has. So we have a project team. It's led by SACOG staff, chiefly your transportation team. We've also hired Civic Thread, who formerly were Walk Sacramento, to be our lead on engagement. And then we have our technical consultant, Steer, who did a lot of the actual analysis and running of formulas to get these results. Every quarter, I meet with 7 committees. One is the municipal committee. That includes your city and county staff. The other is the technical committee, which is our other government agencies like transit operators, regional planning agencies, utilities. And then I have 5 community committees, 1 for each county, and with UBA and Sutter combined. And so this list here of community-based organizations is just a sample of some of the organizations that are represented on our community. And so these are really the folks who have driven a lot of the decision-making on this process and who have provided all the feedback to get the map to where it is today. And then, of course, we've also done public survey and engagement with the general public. We started the development of this equity map with a list of equity metrics. A lot of these are traditional ways that we measure equity in planning, like race and ethnicity and income, pollution, but there are also some other suggestions that at times we use in planning, but honestly, we're really driven by the community members who express like a real concern about these folks in their communities, like older adults, folks with limited English proficiency and amount of education. And so having some back and forth with the community committee members and your staff ultimately developed what I call the equity metric menu. Then what we did is take this equity metric menu, see if I can click through here. Okay, and go out to the public and say, which of these criteria are bigger drivers of inequity in your community? Sort of if you had to rank, which ones are having a bigger impact on folks' quality of life in your community, which ones would you choose? And this is the feedback that we received. So this bar chart shows first just race and ethnicity and income compared by county. I'll note that the last bar says agency. So that's when I asked your city and county staff what they said. And so we sort of think about that as an average, right? Or a gut check between what the community is saying and what your staff are saying about how to understand these issues. So when you look at this chart, I think you see a lot of things that aren't surprising to you, right? We have diversity in our region on how we think about the topic of equity. But I think a big takeaway for me that reflects a lot of what I heard from the community is that everyone's chosen income more than 50%. I heard a lot about inflation and the cost of living and the real economic conditions in our region right now being kind of the most acute equity issue that folks are focused on. On the reverse end, no one has 0 race and ethnicity, right? And so I think sometimes the conversation can feel a little oversimplified, but really everyone is at least having some value and putting some stake in the importance of race and ethnicity and inequities in the different counties. Comparing the remaining 7 metrics, there's a lot of information here. So you have this PowerPoint attached to your staff report if you want to dig into it in more detail, and I'm happy to follow up with any of you on the individual responses. But again, some trends at a high level, right? Cost of living, huge. Older adults or seniors also being a big concern across our region, but particularly in El Dorado and Placer, our foothill communities, where a lot of folks are aging in place. A lot of concern around youth across the board as well. So just sort of interesting slight variations in how folks have weighed equity considerations. So I took all this feedback from the different counties and created county-specific formulas to measure equity within our region. So I start with the sort of raw data by census block group level that sort of says how many seniors, how many low-income households live in a particular place. And then use the feedback by county to apply county-specific weights to that data. So for counties that put income over race and ethnicity and seniors over folks with limited English proficiency, the equity score they received reflected those preferences in the weighting of the metrics. And so when you apply the raw data with the weights based on the feedback, then what we get is a weighted equity score for each block group in the region that measures the sort of relative equity need in each place, and then ended up with cutting off the top highest scoring percent, which we call our home-based equity priority communities. These are shown blue on the slides and blue on the map.
Quick
ahead.
question, how did the weights, I didn't, if you said it, I didn't
You're good.
capture it. How did the weights, how did you arrive at the weights?
So those come from the feedback that we heard from the public and the community on the previous slides. So the public survey I did where I said, you know, how do you value race over income, over seniors, over
And the
individuals
survey
with
was applied-
disabilities
The survey was conducted across which population?
across all 6 counties to the general public. And then we also used feedback from our community committees.
Interesting. What was the level of response? If you sent out 100, how many responses did you get? Or
Oh,
did you target particular? I'm just curious.
yeah. So we had, I believe, 560 or so responses on the survey. And then plus
How
the
was the
feedback.
survey distributed? I'm just,
It was well distributed throughout the 6-county region by population basis. So right, more in Sacramento, fewer in the smaller counties, with the exception of Placer, who had sort of slight underrepresentation based on its population. But it was an equity survey. So as a resident of Placer,
Delivery method, email, snail mail.
all of the above,
Telephone.
social media ads, also leveraging our community organizations that sit on our committees. So that list of folks, they sent it out to their listservs.
And
do-
I'll use the word bias, but the inherent with any survey, the world's run by those who show up, who are interested. You know, Paul Joyner will answer more of the questions than I will, but
no, it's response bias. It's response bias, and typically it's the more aggrieved you are, the more likely you are to respond.
I think it's the opposite,
Really? Okay, well,
right? Because I think sorry, can we have this conversation? Okay, thank you, Vice Chair.
Kathleen? Yeah.
Okay. Any more clarifying questions about how I got to these home-based blue places? I'm gonna complicate it on top of it here for you. So let's make sure we're all on relatively steady ground with how I got to these blue places. Okay, so then reflecting on the direction that it's not just about where people live, it's also where they travel to. We took these blue places and then we took replica data, which is observed travel data, to measure, okay, folks who live in these blue places, where are they traveling to throughout the 6-county region? And then gave each block group a destination score where it's a measure of, sorry, my clicker is, there we go. It's a destination score, which is a measure of how many trips that place receives from the blue areas. So the high scoring destination block groups aren't total trips. These aren't the places that get the most trips in our region across the board. They're very specifically the places that get the most trips from the equity priority parts of our region. So where are the low income communities of color most commonly traveling to? And what you'll notice on the map, so these are also shown in orange on the map, is that these are our community colleges, our industrial job centers, our office parks, our commercial centers are all highlighting here. And it's really capturing those places that are otherwise maybe surrounded by more affluent communities and don't often kind of pop up on an equity metric, but are really, really important for economic prosperity in our region. And so the final map that we're asking for you to recommend approval for today shows both of these things as equity priority places in the region. In blue, we have the home-based equity priority areas. In orange, we have the destination-based equity priority areas. And in green, we have the both, the places where people both live and have jobs and make trips that are coming from equity places.
For the record, I'd just like to add that Director from West SAC has arrived and we are on item number 4.
When I brought this map to your staff, we had some discussion on sort of some of the challenges with census shapes. So in asking for you to recommend approval of this map, I want to make a couple of clarifications. There are places where the block groups get close to a place, but don't totally cover it. On the left, this is Sheridan. So you have sort of southwest of 65 as showing up blue, but most of actual Sheridan is on the other side, which is not covered. And then similarly, you have communities where block groups cover most of the community, but not all of it. This is sort of in the North Sacramento region where you can see these sort of holes in what's shown as equity priority places. When we actually go about defining and selecting mobility zones, we're going to choose boundaries that make sense. So mobility zones only need to overlap with these census block groups. They don't need to follow their exact boundary. So in both of the Sheridan and the North Sacramento case I showed you on the previous slide, both of those places would still be eligible because we're recognizing that a lot of times census block groups get close to a place but don't draw boundaries that make sense. So we're going to add sort of qualitative data on top, understanding where job centers and housing are to draw mobility zones that make sense. Okay, on to next steps. So today, asking for you to recommend approval of the Equity Priority Communities map. Then I'll come back to you in February, layering transportation information on top of that equity priority map and providing a list of draft mobility zones, around 10 to move forward with. Won't be asking for the SACOG board's action on that list of 10 until May. So the time between February and May is for you all and your staff to provide feedback on that list, and for me to go do a bit of a road show to the county level transportation agencies to get more detailed feedback from your colleagues who don't sit on the SACOG board. Once we define those 10 places in the early part of 2025, then we're sort of off to the races, analyzing them and getting into projects, which I can provide more detail about. But this is really the key piece, this first part through May.
You mentioned projects.
Mhm.
What kind of projects and what's the amount of capital dedicated to those projects?
So far, the Mobility Zones has some initial funding from its RAISE grant from the federal government, about $2 million, plus the SACOG board has designated federal carbon reduction program funding to implement this, which is in the order of $10-ish million. So we're looking at really small projects, crosswalks, signage, but I also hear a lot from the community on like policy pieces, like hearing a lot about mothers taking their strollers on buses and how that's really challenging. So I think a lot of the implementation work and the projects that SACOG will do may look sort of more non-traditional than what we are normally get into.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have other comments by the directors? Questions, clarifications?
I can shoot right to the end. I'm feeling confident about the energy at this dais.
Okay.
So staff recommendation, hoping that y'all will recommend that the Transportation Committee recommend that the board adopt this map of equity priority communities. And happy to take any questions, dive back into stuff.
Yes, Director Hudishell. Director Hudishell.
Yeah, and I tried to find it. When I read this morning at a pre-dawn hour in an airport, I saw the word marginalized in there.
Mm.
What do you mean by it? What is the context of marginalized communities? Is that the formula? Is that-
Yes. And so I think we've used that as a synonym for equity priority. Disadvantage is hard because in the state of California, it means a very specific map. So we've tried to use looser language, but we've developed this methodology that says, you know, those 9 metrics in the precise formula resulting in this map, these are the equity priority places for the purposes of this project.
And I forget the term of the term of art that you used, but when a community is divided by a road, is that marginalization or is that factored into this?
So this first step of equity priority is focused on demographic information. So race, ethnicity, income, disability status, education, sort of person-based information. What I'm going to do between this month and when I come back to the board in February is layer that transportation information up. How close are you to a railroad? How many trucks are driving on the arterials in your neighborhood? What's your pavement like? And overlay that with this and try to understand, okay, where are these things happening near each other that we should focus on?
Thank you. Director Chapman.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lauren, and thank you, Kathleen, for your presentation. How do you see, or do you see this changing at all, or how malleable is this? If it goes forward, we prove it, it's the 10 areas, you go out, you do the work, you're doing the work at the county level, you're having conversations. Does this map, do those areas grow at all? Do they shrink at all? Is this vote today kind of like, no, this is exactly where they're focused? Like, how does that feedback then impact what we're looking at on the slide here?
Sure. So the places we're hoping you'll recommend today are going to, the ultimate 10 zones will need to overlap with these places. So we've narrowed down our frame of view down to these places and the areas sort of directly adjacent to them. We're going to be focused on drawing those actual 10 zones around communities rather than census block groups. But we're proposing to narrow down here to generally these places or places directly adjacent.
Maybe think of it as a funnel, right? So
Sure.
this is the wide part of the funnel, right? And then from here, we're gonna get down into 10 more specific zones,
Mhm.
right? That have to have some overlap.
He's on that shirt. Okay, thank you.
That's right.
Thank you. Director Joyner.
So you're basing this on, I assume, the 2020 census?
That's right.
The-
Some of the metrics, yeah, let me go back to that slide to get it exactly right. Yeah, it's mostly the 5-year ACS, but one of the data sources comes from another. Let's see.
Because you're talking about census block groups.
Census block groups, but some of the data came from a different source and we attributed it at the census block group level.
Well, here's my thinking.
Okay.
A community like Lincoln, as you well know, is growing very rapidly.
Yes.
And that 5-year span from 2020 to 2025, the population and the attractions, so Thunder Valley has added. Composition, thank you. Thunder Valley has added a 4,000 seat indoor event center that has our freeways and surface streets packed at certain times of day. I don't see that reflected in this map. I know it's a small thing, but I would even say most of the tribal properties are working very hard on attracting folks. So I guess I'm wondering, how granular do you get on this? Do you go down to a level of saying 4,000 vehicle trips are added each day to Lincoln because of this venue, and therefore I need to show that in green for Lincoln?
So a couple of things. We're at just the equity step. A lot of what you're referring to is the transportation analysis that I'm working through with the team right now. And so we're doing a lot of quantitative analysis, how many trucks, pavement condition, but also qualitative on top. What do we know is going on here? What are the priorities? What efforts have been happening to try to land on 10 that make sense? These 10 are not going to cover all the transportation needs in a very diverse region. So we're balancing a lot in trying to get to these 10, but there is some qualitative consideration of what the conditions on the ground are that aren't necessarily reflected in the data. And the community honestly does a great job of providing that context to us, as do the partner agencies who sit on my committees.
And how frequently do you see updating this?
That has not been decided yet. So this is for an initial 3-year project. So we're going to keep these maps through the end of the project and then honestly bring it back before the board to sort of say, hey, as your project manager, here are my reflections on what I think went well in this project, or where I think there are purposes to move this forward in other venues, and where do I think we should reevaluate or update. We're doing a bit of an experiment here with this project, and so trying to see what the lessons learned are.
Thank you, Director Joyner. Director Early.
Yes, I had a chance to at least see the pollution burden, and I was curious, on what actually that's captured. Is that like air quality?
It's all kinds of things in Cal Enviroscreen. It's water pollution, it's location next to truck facilities. They used a whole list of metrics. And so all we've done is remove the demographic information from Cal Enviroscreen so we don't double count because we have demographic information.
Perfect. And then, just piggybacking off of, the last director's comment in regards to, I think some of the not only, I don't think he was necessarily referring to the quantitative data per se, but just the changes in the environment, major changes that are happening in all of our communities. I will be fascinated to see how that is captured. Because at least for my city, I immediately think of the West Sacramento A's, just testing it out. But the athletics coming to West Sacramento and us having literally nearly 6 months of games every single day. And we see hot tours really from not only this region, but all the way going from Oakland coming through our cities and what that might look like, not only when you're thinking about moving miles. It will, but also guess what happens, right? That there is a burden that is gonna happen for the community, or particularly Washington District, for instance, the folks that are living there that will have to deal with that. And so, I think to my colleague's point, will not only be fascinating, but hopefully be happening to us as well for that.
Absolutely. And I'll also note that on that topic in particular, outside of the Mobility Zones project, the SACOG transportation team is engaging with the partners specifically on the issue of transportation around the A's and trying to see what role there might be for SACOG to help coordinate and bring folks together to make Sac Valley Station to the park a bit easier. So, right, there's a lot of transportation work, and all of it falls into Mobility Zones.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Director Branscombe.
Two things. Well, first on pollution, is noise pollution,
No,
that needs to be captured.
I agree.
I did a paper on noise pollution in college, and it is the one stimulant that you cannot adapt to. Your body has an actual physical reaction to noise at certain levels, and it never goes away. So I really suggest you look at that. As Executive Director Corliss mentioned, we're at we got the funnel here. What we're doing here is very determinative of what happens here. And frankly, I don't understand it. I mean, you're real smart, and I know you spent a lot of time on this. And so the benefit of the doubt is the only reason I could support this. It's just so complicated. And again, that equation, it would be interesting to know more. Maybe I'm the only one. But, and again, this is not a criticism. It's a big job. You had that long list of inputs on the equation, and there's been some calculus on your part to come to a conclusion, again, that is very determinative. This is what's at the, pardon me, what's at the narrow end is inescapable from what's being determined here.
Absolutely.
And I think this is the biggest question.
So let me just try to back up for a second and kind of tell you a little bit of like what you're hearing from Kathleen this morning and why this is important, right? We started a lot of our work around equity and disparities a number of years ago. And I think for like, simply speaking, for many of you, it sometimes felt like a one size fits all, right? And in a one size fits all, there's a lot of parts of our region. Remember Kathleen mentioned regional representation that didn't show up, that didn't kind of pop, right? I'm going to do my best to explain this. What we've done and Kathleen has managed here through this project is not actually having a one size fits all. I mean, we've mentioned a formula, which makes it sort of sound like a black box. These criteria, right? We've heard a lot that equity looks different in different places, right? We do a lot of work in El Dorado County where Woody and many others in El Dorado County will say age and being cut off, older seniors being cut off from healthcare, right? And grocery stores is actually a huge issue up here. So what we've done in this, I think, is it's listen and learn. We've got these criteria with data behind it, and then we've done the best job we can to get out there and get as much input as possible. And guess what? Every county and every community weights and defines equity and disparities differently, right? And that's something we've heard you talk about a lot the last few years. So given that, and given that input, which is always imperfect, but it's pretty comprehensive. What I think is really important and so interesting in all of this is the places that pop up, right? So the places that pop up are across the region. Those disparities exist across the region because everybody's defined it slightly differently. You've had that input locally. And so that's what that map is. And I think the map is pretty broad, pretty telling, pretty interesting. And then, yes, it is determinative. From there, right, then the next challenge is to then define the 10 zones. So nothing is perfect, nothing is scientific, but also this is about as, I think, co-created and community-led with a whole bunch of data behind it, I think, as we've ever done in this topic. And I think it is a result of really good conversation we've had around this board table the last 4 years.
If I may just quickly, Kathleen, I mean no disrespect. You're real smart, and I know you got you've got great values going into this. It's just that here we are, we're being asked to recommend something to the full board. I'd like to understand it better. I'd just simply like to understand something better, the equation and the pieces, because a lot of what's done at SACOG has an equity angle. And these are not huge dollars, as I understand it. $10, $12 million total. And so maybe I shouldn't be wasting so much time on this. I apologize if it seems like I am, but a deeper understanding would be better. Tell me, when you present to SACOG board, is it going to be this presentation, or is it going to be a short version of this presentation?
I'm the item du jour at SACOG board, so I have the luxury of some time. And what I always appreciate about having this be my reporting committee is the feedback you all give on what would make my presentation more effective at the board. So I think I'll seek to try to explain the mechanics of the map development a little bit better in 2 weeks.
Out of respect to staff, I will support this, but I would suggest a more English language version
Understood.
of what you presented here, if you could. Thank you.
Thank you. Directors, we do have public comment. And I would like to bring forth a public comment. Kevin Busey.
Yeah, very quickly, Kevin Busey, Executive Director of Sacramento Transportation Authority. I'm also on the Technical Advisory Committee for this work. You know, I want to just respond to some of the comments I heard. So, you know, there's a little bit like we're trusting Kathleen to run this thing, right? But she brings us in, and we have these meetings quarterly, and we get to go through in much more detail, obviously, than the board goes through on what's the exact methodology that's being used, and how could that methodology bias the results, and what do the results look like, and do those results align with what we are seeing as an agency? And so far, everything looks pretty good. There, where we think there's equity communities, there are equity communities. Are there new areas that we weren't thinking about? Yes, there are some of those. But from my standpoint, we think, you know, I think Kathleen's doing a great job in actually defining those equity communities. But to Director Branscome's point, there are some, you know, you look at the overall subset of data they're using, they're looking at a census block level. Census blocks can be very small and they can be very large. So at our last meeting, I brought up, what about these very large census blocks? Because you're aggregating the data to that, and is the entire census block, right? And there's a little bit of malleability later that comes in to try to fit the equity areas to the actual areas, especially related to transportation needs. And there's a good slide in this deck kind of talks about how we sort of best fit the information that we have to the actual communities that need it. And so that process will happen later. But I just, from my standpoint on the Technical Advisory Committee, I'm very comfortable with the work that's been done. And she's done a great job in meeting with us. That include, you know, my group includes the El Dorado County and Placer County agencies, as well as the transit agencies, but I'm sure she's having those same conversations with city and county staff. So thank you very much.
Oh, sure. This is a complementary set piece, right? There's other funding sources that will help with equity issues and transportation issues and things like that. Does my question make sense?
There's more analysis to come. Is that?
No, this isn't the only pot of money.
No, there's a lot of ways to slice and dice equity, as we talk about a lot here.
Right.
we put forward is a new way, and a slightly new way of measuring that lets each county weight things differently, which we've never done before. And so what we're doing in mobility zones is sort of saying, what happens? What stuff shows up on the map, and what kinds of projects do we focus on if we weigh things slightly differently?
And I'm gonna characterize Director Branscome's comments. You get engagement. We want to drill down. So we are, advancing something that we feel like we understand. But boy, this is, and I think I heard Mr. Corliss say, this is a combination of art and science.
Yes.
Right? And so we're never going to get it precisely correct. Income issues in Sutter County are different than they are in El Dorado County. Sure. And I appreciate Director Corliss saying it's not a one size fits all. So.
And if I could, just to try to, because this is important learning, right? The work that we have done on equity is not a one size fits all body of work. For those of you, especially on the REI working group, and I'm looking over there at Chair Jennings, who's been leading that work. When we push back as a region on definitions of equity, it's because we have a simple way to do it. And a simple way to do it at a state level means we don't show up. And we say as a region, boy, you don't really understand my community. You don't understand the core neighborhoods in Roseville or the seniors in El Dorado County, right? And so in some ways, by the definition of this work, Director Branscombe, we are taking a slightly more nuanced and complex look at defining equity because we think that's what's needed.
It is more creative, for sure.
Director Early?
I actually really want to understand both of my directors when they're asking for more information, because I'm looking at the report and it looks like they have, okay, because what level of granularity are you, or specificity are we looking for? I'm
just making a general, anytime I see a model or a formula, I always want to know, I'll give you a perfect example. How does Justice 40 or SACOG's disadvantaged communities overlay? Or, are they two separate things? And I don't need to know that. I'm intellectually curious about all models because we have in the water quality world, we have this expression, all models are wrong, some are just useful. All right.
As a quantitative psychologist, totally, yes. So I'm right there with you, which is why sometimes government policy can be hard, because sometimes we're moving things forward and we don't have the opportunity to pause and get in that level of weed. So I guess that was just because I'm looking at the formulas, I'm looking at reports, I feel like there's a lot of detail here. And so I was just curious, what more could have been brought?
If that's a question, it's there. I understand what the factors are. It's how they're integrated and come to an answer. And then more importantly, is this exercise going to lead to a template for action on other fronts? So if that's the case, we really want to have a deep understanding, and it'll take more time than we've dedicated to it today. So that's just my view.
Thank you.
We're being asked today to look at the item in one scope of these metrics. And so if there isn't any other we have a comment from Director Jennings.
Director Jennings, I'm sorry, could you use your mic? Thank you.
Our job today is to adopt it and recommend it to the board. And I know we never feel like we have enough time to really go through something as much as we want to. And even when we do have the time, we feel like we could have used more time in order to understand it even better. I think my question would be is, in adopting this and recommending it to the board, I feel comfortable that the methodology with diverse community input has been taken. I feel comfortable that from a regional standpoint, we've looked at this as much as possible to make sure that we address each issue in the different parts of our region. I feel like we've done that. Will we have the opportunity to come back and revise it during the course of time as we see fit? And do we have a schedule in place to be able to do that?
You you can do anything, right? What I would say is that if in the course of this 3-year project, which I'm almost 1 year through, we were to revise this foundational piece on which there are dependencies that we've discussed, it's going to cause schedule delays and will likely also frustrate the community members who have worked with this, right? We need to have a conversation with them on why we're making the change. If your question is more, we're using this map for this project, could we revisit it if we wanted to use it for something else? Absolutely. We've made it for the purposes of this project, and I think we would need to take a good hard look at it with a different lens if we wanted to use it for a different purpose.
And my only question really is, if we find that there's something significantly wrong with the process, we bring everyone back to the table and we talk about what revisions need to be made. I'm just asking, is that possible? And is that something that we should probably put into the formula now so that we can at least look at it and get everybody's input, that we either keep moving forward or we look at potential change? And I just want to know if that option is available.
I'm going to answer your question. First of all, I really appreciate the level of engagement you're all having in this. This is why we are doing this project, because we wanted to dig a little bit deeper under the sort of the one size fits all sort of version of equity, right? I think as Kathleen said, we are trying to get this top of the funnel so that we can begin to get to these 10 zones. And I would imagine that you would be interested in the 10 zones and how that happens. And so that's something you're going to come back with in the spring. If there's board interest in before that, getting a look under the hood of that would be important. I would have you think about this as a really important pilot project, right? We are trying to learn. We are trying to listen to our communities and understand the true diversity in every sense of that word across this region. And as Kathleen just said, it is up to you all as the board whether you want to use this map going forward, right? Like we're saying adopt it now. If there's things we learn in the next 6 months and 12 months and say, you know what, actually we would revise this. We'd like to use it in other situations for other kinds of projects. I think let's have that conversation, right? This is a pilot project to learn from. We can always do things, apply the map differently based on this is our way of regionally defining equity, like one way of doing it. It's not the only way of doing it. And there's many applications to that. So there's a, do you want a stopping point before these zones? Because that might be of interest, right? And then think about this as a sort of a pilot project. And as we go and learn, are there things we would learn and apply differently or do differently, maybe in other ways? As Kathleen said, we've had different definitions of equity. We've had EJ areas, we've had disadvantaged communities, we've had Justice 40. This is one that is really more locally grown, honestly. And that's what's exciting about it. We can change that. And you can discuss how you want to apply that in different ways going forward. Does that make sense?
It does. If I might, this is really
I
important.
just want to speak to the clock. We have more items, and
Yeah.
so let's
So-
make this our last comment.
So I
if we
want
can.
this is a question and a comment. So to Director Early's question of me. My question is, if I look at figure 6, which is Placer County, some of that makes sense to me. But some of it, my question is, do we know why west of Fitterment Road in a new affluent area, why that area pops up as an equity zone? Is it income? And why just across Highway 65 for me, why that pops up? Is it pollution burden? So under each of these, are there sort of the drivers for that? Thank you.
Yep. If you open the web map, you can click any of those places and a table will pop up and it will show you exactly what was in the data for that place and the weight that it received, how it ranks in that county. So you can, all that information is at your fingertips.
I move that we recommend this to the Board of Directors.
I've got one more.
I will take that as the
question, please.
first, but we have a,
I strongly endorse Director Jennings' comments as to flexibility. Wide eyes, flexibility. And because again, here we are, we're at the top of the funnel. And the last thing we want to have is disruptions down here. I hate those. So what's done up here has to be very well done and broadly embraced so that we don't have disruptions as we get to conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We have a motion and a second, but we have one more comment by Dr. Early.
Last comment, and I'll make it quick. I looked through the communities engaged, a great list. The only thing that I saw potentially that might be missing, and again, I don't know how often we actually engage this particular community, is the tribal communities across our counties. Unsure if you did engage. Okay, I see you nodding yes. That makes me feel so much better.
All right, we have a motion by Director Hudishell, a second by Chapman. Can we do a roll call vote, please?
Director Branscombe,
Good job, staff. Yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Early for Guerrero,
Aye.
Howdeshelt,
Aye.
Jennings,
Yes.
Joyner.
Aye.
Sander absent, Vice Chair Gog absent, Vice Chair Lauren,
Aye.
and Chair Bradford. I noticed, for the record.
Aye, sorry,
Thank you.
unmute didn't work.
That's okay. Thank you. Motion carries.
Before you leave, when are you thinking of bringing this back to the full board? The reason I ask is you're about to have a third of your board be brand new, and this is heady stuff for brand new folks.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, so I'll bring this actual item based on your recommendation, thank you, to the full board in 2 weeks with some revisions based on feedback from today. And then February will be currently scheduled the next time that we'll have an information item so that the new board can try to digest what we've done so far and what's left to get us towards the 10 zones. That's the schedule I had coming into this morning. I think based off this discussion, some more touch points, I'm gonna work on
Yeah,
it.
I would think in 2 weeks, you're gonna have a bunch of new board members.
Yeah.
As well.
Okay.
Kathleen, before you go, I would just like to say that it would be a fabulous lunch presentation to look at the map.
That's true.
And to be able to ask questions about the map and show how granular that map is and what the scope is, so we could actually better understand our different counties and areas.
Thank you.
It's a great setup for next year and doing some deep dive with the new board members, with the entire board members on how we define equity in this region, number one. And so stay tuned for that because the REI working group under Chair Jennings' direction and many others, right, we're trying to think a little bit about that. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Kathleen for the amazing effort in all of this. It's a huge lift, and it has not been done here by us in this region to this level of kind of input before. So much appreciated.
Thank you. We're going to be moving to Mr. Jennings, Director Jennings.
I can say this to the whole board.
Go ahead.
I have to apologize. Hopefully we still have a form, but I have an 11 o'clock meeting at the. This is an information item.
No, this,
Not an information item.
You're late.
item 20.
So does that now fit?
How are we doing?
Yeah, you're okay.
We're good.
Yeah, we're good.
All right.
All right, item number 5, 2025 project delivery process. And Miguel Mendoza is going to present this for us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Kathleen is always a hard act to follow, but hopefully I can do this one quickly. Yes, yeah, in respect to the other item as well. So before you today is the 2025 project delivery process. And the ask is for you to approve and recommend to the board to approve the item as well. I really want to cover 3 things and hopefully I can do it with enough detail for you here and quickly. The first, what does delivery mean in this case? And what are we delivering as 1B? The second being what the process is a general overview. And then the third, why do we need a process like this and why the ask now? In this context, delivery means very simply your sponsor agencies, project sponsor agencies getting approval from Caltrans and the federal government to start spending federal money. And even more, right, specific on that, this is 2 types of federal money, which is congestion mitigation, air quality, and surface transportation block grant. If that sounds familiar to you, that's because that's the federal revenues for the SACOG regional funding rounds. So essentially, this is how we make good on our awards to the projects that have come before you and the board and have been approved for funding. You may notice that there's an omission on that revenues from the funding rounds, which is STIP, State Transportation Improvement Program. And the reason why this process doesn't cover that is because the California Transportation Commission and Caltrans really oversee the administration of those funds. While SACOG is able to assign dollars, STIP dollars to projects, we don't have much control over how those dollars can advance, when they could come through, or any changes to those. So that's why we will omit those. That's why it's omitted for this process. So all of that essentially is, how do we move forward with the projects that we have awarded CMAQ and STBGP funds to? General overview, right? We have three tiers to this process. The first, when the board awards dollars to projects, we work hand in hand with project sponsors to find the years that they will most likely need the dollars, right? Some projects are a little bit further out, some are very close. So we work with them and assign them to specific years where we have capacity. The region gets a certain amount of funds every year, and we try to assign projects to those funds and make sure that we are going to utilize all of them. And so that first year is for the projects in those years. So for example, projects that are identified for 25 will have priority in the first quarter. They can come in, ask for approval from the federal government, and be assured that the money will be there for them to use. So that's tier one. Tier two are projects in future years, 26, 27, and 28 in this case. What'll happen then, right, is after the first quarter, if there is still some regional funding available, meaning some projects needed some more time, perhaps some of those tier one projects needed time, we invite others in future years, 26, 27, and 28, to come forward and ask for funding if they're ready. This region is a very strong delivery region. Typically, we will have asks for projects to move forward, which is really, really good. And then the third tier, which we don't really get to very much, is if a project that has been awarded by the board through the regional funding round needs to cover a cost overrun, which happens, we would have the ability to loan them some of these funds, and then they would pay SACOG back through a variety of sources, depending on each agency, of course, on their capability and what they have available to pay back. I want to go back really quickly to tier two. Again, we don't really get to tier three very much. With tier two, what typically happens, right, is after the first quarter, if we still have remaining funds, the projects that want to move forward can do so, and they can start their project earlier, which is really, really good. But you may ask, what happens if we don't have funds anymore? We have options available to us, and I'll go through them quickly and really talk about the ones that we utilize the most. So the first is we ask them to stop and wait until 26 where you have funding. We don't tend to do that, as I go ahead and I'll describe why. The second is we ask the agencies to move ahead with local dollars while we wait for the federal dollars to become available, typically in the next year that the funding is available to the region. The third is we ask them to move ahead with partial federal funding. Let's say you have a $2 million ask, but we only have $1 million available after all the other projects have come in. Hey, can you do with $1 million for now until we can make the next tranche available? And then fourth, we go out and we have really strong relationships with other regions. If other regions are not using their money this particular year, we actually have the ability to borrow those funds and then repay them back, typically the next fiscal year, interest-free. And so it helps us advance projects. And really, there's two reasons why a region would loan out their funding. One, because they're just really nice people. I think we have good relationships, and they know that they can get the money back and be assured that it'll be returned to them. Second is we typically refer to it as AB 1012. The California Transportation Commission has the ability to reprogram regional funds if it's not used within 3 years. So if you're a region that's saving up for a really big project, let's say, you might not use these funds for 3 years. If you loan it out and then you get paid back, it's almost new money, right? That clock restarts for you. So mutual benefit to us and to them. We get to advance projects, and then they get to sort of either feel good that they've helped us or reset the clock on those funds. Okay, so that's a high overview of the process. I want to say that I don't remember, I've only been here 2 years, but I believe looking at our history, very, very long time, we haven't had many projects that we've had to ask to wait. right? We really want to make sure that if a project is ready and the board has awarded it and has said it has merit, we want to make sure it can advance when it's ready. And we really utilize the loans very heavily and as prudently as we can, right? These are relatively risk-free, or really risk-free. And so that's a high overview of the process. And really, I hinted at why we have it. It helped us remain nimble. There are other regions out there where if you're assigned to 2026, you're remaining in 26, whether you're ready or not, right? This allows us to really help projects advance and coordinate with project sponsors and make sure that if a project wants to come in, we can do it. And so I'm going to stop there. Hopefully that was a good overview of it and take any questions and that you may have.
Do we have clarifying questions for Miguel Mendoza? I would like to take public comment on the item if there isn't any clarifying questions at the time, this time. And Kevin Busey, would you please come forward?
Yeah, sorry, Kevin Busey, Executive Director of STA. I just, I'll make these comments very short. This process works really well for us as the city, especially the cities and counties. It allows us to advance projects. There are projects that get delayed over time. They can't use their federal funding. And this process allows those projects in a very systematic process to come in and actually use those funds and keep advancing projects. It's worked well. We've used it for a long time. So I just want to say from my standpoint, it works really well. I hope the board approves this item. Second is, a lot of what SACOG does, at the board level, what SACOG does at the board level, you don't see the stuff that Miguel does, right? The stuff that Miguel does, he's keeping all the money flowing and all the projects moving, and your staff is working directly with Miguel and his team to make all these projects happen. And, the project delivery side of this is super important. And I just want to say that appreciate all the work that Miguel and his team are doing to keep these projects funded and moving, because he doesn't often get a chance to come up here. So thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Busey. We have another public comment, and this will be by Jeffrey Tardigia.
Sorry. Yeah, Jeff Tardigia. My comments relates to the factor of accountability on projects. I've seen in the past and know that you are doing so much better than 5 years ago about where money goes, but also coming back of what's the success in the other part. You just do with the money and the priority of it, but making sure, and this is where I also involved with some statewide and some across the country efforts and understanding how they do different. It is with great bit of irony to realize that Sacramento County, I will specifically suggest and say, is one of few regions that it doesn't have the priority funding for the county. It has it for the region. But I also am aware of other states where it's at the state level that it controls these factors. I've just finished with a study that related to disability and the aging. And just like the homeless, one of the relative realizations is that, you're not going to pick up that information, that data, because they don't use our modern technology, which provides you with these issues. You've got a great effort of bringing more capability and ability of public comment with the efforts that you have made. And I appreciate SACOG for doing that and working down the granular levels, the levels below just dealing with dollars and money. That's my public comment to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tardigia. The item before us is to approve the delivery process for federal fiscal year 2025. Is there any other discussion? I'm looking for
Early
motion.
moves.
Early moves.
Joiner seconds.
All right. Joiner seconds, and we have a roll call vote.
Director Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman,
Aye.
Early for Guerrero,
Aye.
Powdershell,
Aye.
Jennings, absent Joyner,
Aye.
Sander, absent Vice Chair Gog, absent Vice Chair Lauren,
Aye.
and Chair Bradford.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Motion carries, and we want to thank you, Miguel, for all your hard work. Excellent. All right, moving to an information-only item. This is for discussion and to kind of give direction on the item, and it's state funding program information presented by Christina Spank.
I do have a presentation, I think that's coming up. So, thank you all first for just the efforts over the last 2 years for the funding round. I know it was a lot that we've gone through. We're not done yet. Now we actually have to execute those funding programs. So this is one of the first discussions that we are going to have regarding the actual funding sources. So a quick reminder about the process. This is what we've gone through over the last 2 years. We are at the green boxes now. The first program that we are going to look to roll out is the 4-county STIP program. So we are just today bringing you with a overview of what we are seeing as the potential funding that's available for that program, and have a discussion with you about how much of that should be going for the county competitive portions, and how much should we kind of pull together or do as a set aside to advance a regional project. We are hoping to come back in February of 2025 with the actual program budget to be adopted, with a call for projects then in March of next year to open it up to partners. So just a quick reminder about the STIP program goals. So we centered this program around many of the same themes and things that we've heard that we did with the federal programs as well. So a lot of fix it first type of projects, state of good repair, more certainty of funding, particularly since 4 counties. So for those 4 counties, reminder, it's Yolo, Yuba, Sutter, and Sacramento. So we also wanted to see a greater partnership and regional support of projects. That was a big thing that we've heard. And then just consistency with an implementation of some of our state and regional goals as well. This is state money, so things like CAPDI and other state principles are going to be core of this, but also SACOG's strategic plan and our triple bottom line are at the center of this as well. So, as I mentioned, it's a 4-county program. So this is sort of how we see it happening. So if you're not familiar with STIP, there are county shares that are identified by the state. We talked about this during the process. That's based on population and vehicle lane miles. It's not something that SACOG calculates. That is what's given to us. And then it's broken up though by county, just because that's how they figure out the amount available based on that data. What we decided upon through the funding round process collectively is to create two programs, right? One is the county competitive programs, where each county has their shares and you submit projects to be reviewed and awarded through a competitive process within each of the 4 counties, so not against each other, within them. We also agreed that while we didn't want us to pool and combine all the funds like we have historically done, we wanted to continue that with a small portion of the funds, or it could be large depending on what you all decide, to advance a regionally significant project, or something that we believe as a region is important for us to advance because we see some significant benefits to it. We wanted to preserve that right. So how much money do we think we have available? So this is based on 2 years, and this is what the state has given us for numbers. These are the percentage shares that they calculate, and this is how it translates out to dollars. So projects that receive this funding or can receive this funding must be eligible, not just with the STIP guidelines, but there's funding sources that go into this, both at the state and federal level. So there's some eligibility requirements that are associated with that. One of the big ones with STIP that we have to consider as we go through this is that there needs to be a full funding commitment to any projects that can receive STIP dollars. So there are some very specific kinds of projects and what stages you're in that can be eligible for this funding. So we'll have to keep that in mind. Yes.
This one here, I think that you would go on the switch, right?
Oh, yes, that one was switched. That one was switched. Yeah, we corrected it in the staff report. You're correct. Yep, I'm sorry about that. So sort of the big thing that we need to talk about today, there's 4 potential scenarios that we've provided in the staff report, and we'll talk about today, about splitting between these 2 project components. So just for some context, our partners at NTC, they have in their legislation that they can pool up to 15% of their funds. So this is something that other places do, where they pool only a portion rather than all of it, like we're used to doing. So these scenarios that we're going to talk about today very quickly are not set in stone. You can do 5%, you could do 15%, you could do 17%, whatever it is. This is just for context, illustrative of what could be, to understand that set aside versus what's available to the counties for competitive. As I mentioned, you're not taking action today. That's February. I want to get some really good feedback from you today so that we can come back in February with a recommendation that we think you all will be comfortable with moving forward as the board. So, you know, again, the split, not only do you have to have the full funding commitment to be eligible for STIP funding, we are going to have to figure out what projects in our region are sort of at that stage where this funding makes sense. Do they come off of our grant prioritization list that you all just adopted in October, or do we want to look outside of that, because we recognize that not every single county may have submitted something because they didn't have a project to submit. That list gets done every year. This gets done every 2 years. So there is kind of a timing thing. So we don't want to restrict it to that. There's options for other projects out there that's not exclusive to that list. It's a good place to start. We also are not doing the revolving match program anymore. That was something we did in the last funding round. And because of the corrective action and some of the things that we had to do, we're not going to do that program in its current iteration or past iteration. There is the potential to do that match here with this source, as well as in the main funding program with some of the federal sources as well. So there's still the opportunity for having that benefit of that program. And when we looked back at the regional match, the matches that we were being requested to fund are anywhere between $800,000 and $4 million. So if we're talking about wanting to use this for match, you could either do one project or multiple projects, depending on how you do it. We could also use this to just simply fund a significant project in the region. We looked back at some of the projects that we've historically funded with STIP in the last few funding cycles. County Road 98 in Yolo County funded $8.7 million from the STIP program. The Garden Highway Improvement Project in Sutter County was another 4.3. North Beale Complete Streets in Yuba County was $4.5 million. The R Street, like 29th, 30th pedestrian crossing in the city of Sacramento was $2.6 million. So you can see the types of projects that might be funded with this funding and the levels of funding that they're requesting. So keep that in mind as you look at some of these percentage splits. So, you know, 10% obviously would preserve, we think is a pretty fair thing to look at, would preserve a good amount of funding for those county competitive projects and leave a little over $4 million for the set aside. 12%, we put this up here. This is consistent with how we do our transit discretionary share program, where 88% of the funding goes kind of the earned share is what we call it. And then the 12% is the competitive or discretionary program. Using that methodology, that's why there's the 12% split. And then of course, 25 and 50%, you can see 50-50 to us seems maybe a little bit too much. One of the benefits of doing the STIP program in this way with the 4 counties is that it does provide certainty in terms of how much funding is going to come back within a geographic boundary of the counties. So obviously the more you put aside for some sort of regional significant project or projects, the less of the certain funding is available to these individual counties. So that's sort of a board discussion and board trade-off that needs to be made when you're going in February to understand or to make the decision of how much you want to set aside. So these are kind of where the numbers are falling. It's very logical, smaller set aside, more money for the counties. So, you know, I think the other piece is what can be funded. STIP, like I mentioned, besides the full funding commitment, no capacity increasing highway and roadway projects, can be transit and rail, it can be bike and pedestrian. Non-capital as it relates to transportation demand management is also available to be funded, and match for federal funds, as we just discussed, is totally eligible. So there's a wide range of projects that can fall under this program, and we're really excited to be doing it this way. I think it'll be much more clear for our partners and more clear for us where the money is going. We can track it. We can make sure that we're monitoring it and understanding where our value is with the projects that we fund with these specific fund sources. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, but just to give you kind of a sense of the program timeline, as I mentioned, I'm going to be taking something hopefully in February for you to adopt for the actual budget for this program with the actual call for projects happening in March. That would allow us to complete the funding awards in June and get this programmed into the required state document by August of 2025. So we're kind of working backwards from that August date. We will begin working with partners really soon to start to talk about this once we kind of get a sense this month of where the board is going. But we'll have plenty of time to kind of talk with folks starting in February and March up until when the applications are due to really walk people through this new process. So, happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right, we have a question from Director Hudeshow.
Yeah, more of a comment and following along with what Director Joyner said. You'll have new faces.
Yes.
And so just a suggestion, I know where Garden Highway is, but I don't know what year that funding was. So kind of match that up in your analysis.
Sure.
Please.
All right.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's state and federal money involved here.
Mhm. Well,
Oh.
it comes from state and federal funding. The STIP has a combination of both. It just depends.
What'd you say?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Keep going.
So how stable are those funds? California's dealing with a significant deficit right now. And we've got Elon and VBEC going after federal dollars. How do you have a feel for how stable those funding sources are?
I don't have a feel for how stable those funding sources are. I'd be curious if Alex with Caltrans has a sense of that with the state. I think that there's some unknowns, but Eric.
I mean, I could speak a little bit at a high level, right? So Article 19 of the California Constitution protects gasoline sales taxes. I think the thing for the board to consider is the switchover in vehicle fleet, right? There is a projection that the state has made that these revenues are going to decline over time. How quickly that is, as you brought up in the past, depends on the uptake of electric vehicles. That's the major concern. The federal components of it is a smaller piece. And again, we have funding at the federal level for transportation through 2026. So I think at least for this process, we feel comfortable in moving forward, but it's beyond that there is a little bit more uncertainty.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we are talking about a snapshot in time for this next program. I think the way we've designed this new funding round is also to be malleable and be able to react quickly, if not be proactive to what is happening that is kind of out of our control. So we anticipate making changes probably every time we do this, tweaks, I would say, not changes, to make sure that we're able to use the funding we have.
Smart outlook.
Dr. Early.
It's just a clarifying question, and I feel like I understand it, but I just want to hear you confirm that the set aside, depending on, again, the percent, wouldn't matter what the percent that we recommend would be pooled across all the counties.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Four.
Yes.
Four.
Yeah. Okay. And and the decision of how those dollars or where they potentially would be allocated, the set aside, not the competitive. Because when I see competitive, I think we have a very solid process of like, you submit,
Yep.
here's where you, and
Yep.
so would there just be some
No, there would be a process.
flexibility or?
Well, no, there would be a process for that. I mean, you have to have eligibility requirements met, but I think that's a board decision. There will be a recommendation based on what is submitted to us. There's only going to be, a few projects probably that wouldn't go in the competitive, that would want to be in that set aside. And it would be one project, could be 5 projects. We don't know, depending on how much it is, but it would have to be a competitive process that is decided by the board as well.
Got it. So set aside and competitive.
Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you.
Do we have any other comments before taking public comment? All right, we have public comment on the item. Kevin Busey.
Thank you.
Kevin Busey, Executive Director of Sacramento Transportation Authority. Yeah, I just want to make a couple comments on this. So SACOG has done a great job in developing these competitive guidelines for how the competitive side would work. Right now, that regional set aside, it's really unclear on how those funds would be used. It could follow some existing prioritization efforts, or it could be a new process, or they could just discretionary at the discretion of the board make some decisions. So because of that there's a lack of certainty on how those regional set aside funds would be used. My thought would be to be, essentially have a lot more on the competitive side. Keep in mind that, El Dorado and Placer County are RTPAs. They completely control their STIP funding, and typically 100% of their funding stays within that county in particular. They're not going to be part of the pooling, obviously, because they're doing their own thing, unless, of course, they decided that they would like to come in on that pooling. But so far, that has not been the case. So it's it's very interesting situation. And so just because of all those things, I'm leaning towards having a much higher competitive side of it. It gives us more certainty to how those funds are going to be used, because there's certainty in the dollar amount and it stays within the county itself. And the guidelines themselves have already been completed and adopted by the board. So I understand how those funds would be used. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other public comments on the item? More direction from the board? All right. Sorry about that.
But Vice Chair Lauren,
go ahead.
just a thought, and, appreciate Kevin's public comment. Obviously, in a time of kind of maybe some shrinking resources or questions from our board about what's the future of funding and the certainty. If I was local, right, the 90% competitive in my county would look good. But this is a great question for the board, for a regional board to tackle and wrestle with, right? If we had 100% county by county shares, we never would have previously, when we pulled everything, got to do the Fifth Street Bridge in Yuba Sutter, right? So that's the trade-off, is you can have more certainty on the one hand, and yet you can also do bigger things on the other. The question is, who gets to do those bigger things, right? And which project does it go on? So that's the final tee up for you.
Thank you so much.
Even though that bridge has been formally named something else, we in Marysville are proud that every bridge connecting into Marysville is named after a street in Marysville.
All right. Yes, Director.
Thank you,
Chapman.
Vice Chair Lauren. I think for me, I think, James, you hit the nail on the head. And sitting on a regional board, I think that as much as attractive and as easy as it would be to say, let's just do the 90-10, when I step back and look at kind of the competitive side of it, specifically for us, I would imagine like the YOLO 80 project would not have moved forward or be done if there weren't match dollars or funding from this board or from SACOG in general, right, to get that over the finish line. So I think striking that balance is important. I don't know if you're looking for like, hey, we want to do the 88 and 12, or what that is. I do definitely lean more towards having the set aside for kind of the regional pot, not at the 10%. And I think it's one of the hard parts, right? Sitting on the board like this, and kind of learning curve for me at least, was you want to look at that 90%. Like, yeah, I want all that to go to Yolo County, but it's incumbent upon us as board members, right, to look at it from a regional perspective and how these decisions and how these match dollars and grant dollars impact kind of our transportation network as a whole in this region. So I do think it's important for us to move that number down and strike that balance. What that is, I don't know if. I like using the model, the FTA transit that we're already using, and staying kind of in that ballpark, because it seems like it works, and we're modeling that throughout our other distribution of dollars. So I think it's just important for us to lay out what the pros and cons are of it, right? If we do that 90%, 10%, what does that look like for projects that come forward? Is it just one regional project in the next 3 years? And I think it's important, as we move this forward, to have some, to dive a little bit deeper into that. And what does that look like? If we decide to do a larger percentage on competitive, what would that have meant to projects 2 years ago? Which ones maybe were off the list, right? And kind of bring it back to things that we've worked through and have seen in our own communities. So I'd be interested to hear if other people have thoughts on it or what their ideas are on those percentages. But I definitely lean more towards kind of having that larger pot for SACOG to have set aside. Thank you
so much. Before I call on Dr. Early, Director Bradford has a comment.
Yeah, I just, excuse me, just wanted to really echo what Director Chapman had to say. It certainly is easy to want all the funding to be dedicated to our communities, but I do worry about our ability to do larger regional significant projects, the more funding that we have locally. And so I think there is a good balance there. Certainly, I don't know what that number is. I don't think it's 50%. I think that's, too high. And then I think, the 10% for the set aside might be too low. So something in the middle there, where we can accomplish regionally significant projects while still having local certainty, I think is important. So.
Thank you so much, Director Bradford. Director Early.
I'll be quick. I echo both Director Bradford as well as Director Chapman in regards to the purpose of SACOG and why we as counties and municipalities have all agreed to come together regionally. And it is because we are all impacted by each other. And much of the work that has happened over the many years of SACOG has been because of our ability to be able to come together and say the whole is greater than our individual parts and what that looks like and how do we accomplish that. And so it does feel like 10% is too low. Echoing Director Bradford, 50% is definitely way too high. I would look at, just in order to give you something to walk away with, something between 15 and 25%. Seems like that would be reasonable. With, again, that set aside, and you heard me when my first question in regards to what would that really mean? Really us agreeing all together, what would be the regional projects that, again, we would say this is important to the entire region, and that's why these set aside dollars are going to fund this, versus, again, it being in the competitive. And so I think we would need an eye on that, and have that as our sort of North Star. I know I said brief, but.
No, I appreciate all these comments. This is really helpful for us. And I just wanted, when we did the funding round working group sessions with both staff and board, there was a strong emphasis on still wanting to have the ability to be flexible and set funding aside, because I think there was a universal recognition to what you just said, that something that happens in one boundary impacts all of the other boundaries that surround it, even if they don't touch it. That was something that was consistent through the whole process. And so this preserves the ability to continue to do that in a meaningful way. So understanding, I think, the percentage and all that feedback was just really, really helpful to know maybe what a comfort zone is in terms of how much you set aside, because it is important. You've started that process already through the grant prioritization list that you've adopted now twice. We know we can come together and agree on projects, whether they're in our boundaries or not, that are important. So this is just sort of another iteration or another version of that you would be doing with a specific source of funding. So I appreciate all the comments. It's very helpful.
Thank you very much. If I can just say that I would also agree with Bradford, Early, and Chapman on this item. All right, that was an information only item. Oh, we have Director
Just
Joyner.
very quickly, I think the conversation is heading in the right direction. Bruce and I are largely remaining silent because effectively we don't have a dog in this fight, and we want to support your efforts.
All right. Speaking of having a dog in this fight, I would just like to thank you, Director Joyner, for all of the work that you have done on SACOG. I understand that this is your last meeting, and
that was applause because I'm leaving, right?
Yeah. All right. Would you like to add any comments about?
I know Director Joyner has told us he will be attending the December 19th full board meeting.
Attending, but no longer a board member.
Attending, not in his official capacity. This is his last meeting in his official capacity. We are losing yet another veteran. Director Joyner has been on this board for 12 years. He has served as Vice Chair of Transportation Committee in 2017, 2018, and Chair of the Committee in 2019. He has been on many of our study missions and our regional tours. I don't know if I'll get a chance to say anything at the full board on December 19th, because you'll have other people weighing in, but I appreciate so much your commitment to transparency, to being engaged, to asking great questions, and to really being a great advocate for Lincoln and your county and the region. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Ditto. And yesterday at the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, we recognized both Director Joyner and Supervisor Holmes, who had 19 years on the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. And to your point, Mr. Corliss, I appreciate, and said this yesterday, Director Joyner has I can't say this word, Socratic? Yeah, Socratic way of asking questions to draw people out so they can, right? And you too, Director Branscombe. So they can make sure that they fully understand the decision before them. And so appreciate it. And yeah, and especially your work on the funding round.
Thank you, Bruce.
I'm deeply honored to work with you.
Right back at you.
All right. The next meeting of the committee will be held on Thursday, February 6th, 2025 at 10 a.m. in this boardroom. This meeting, James, do you have a?
Please do stick around for the lunch. We've got a lot of talk about travel model and travel modeling this morning. And since you've asked so many questions about the travel model, that's our lunch between now and 1 p.m. So stay tuned, stick around.
And please stay for lunch. All right, this meeting is adjourned, 12:06.
We've decided that 2 years of construction is gonna be on 12th Street and 160.
It wasn't me.
Wasn't us.
Excuse me.
That's right.
All right, voting does count and so does our meeting time. So this is a continuation of the transportation meeting and we will be having, excuse me, a lunch presentation. Take it away, James. I like saying that.
Sure, yeah, no, I'm gonna introduce staff. So as you may all remember, from time to time, you have lots of questions about our modeling, our travel model, right? Our projections for growth, transportation, traffic, vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas, right? So we wanted to give you an opportunity with Kyle Shipley here on our staff, who is really the planner over our travel model. I want to give you an opportunity for Kyle to walk through the basics of the travel model. These lunches are, as we can tell, informal. And a chance, I mean, we're starting late, obviously. Kyle's got about a 30-minute presentation. You can ask questions, but doesn't have to be moderator or facilitated. But anyway, this is to give you all a little bit of an opportunity from the questions you've been asking over the past year about how does the model work? What goes into it, right? How do we use it? How does it get used beyond SACOG and maybe some of your other jurisdictions and the folks who use the travel model? So without further ado, we've got Kyle Shipley. Kyle, take it away.
All right. Thank you, James. Thank you, Chair. Hello, directors. As James mentioned, my name is Kyle Shipley. I am the Transportation Modeling and Analysis Group Lead here at SACOG staff. And today I'm hoping to give you a brief introduction about our travel demand model. Hopefully by the end of this meeting, we can have a little bit stronger understanding of how the travel demand model works, how it fits into the blueprint process, and then what additional resources are available here at SACOG staff and online that you have if you have further questions. So a bit of an overview of what we're going to go through today. First, we're going to go through why do we use travel models? How do travel models work? What are the travel model inputs? How do we know if the model is reasonable? And finally, what comes out of the travel model? I think my clicker turns off. There we go. Okay. So first of all, why do we use travel models? First and foremost, it's really to develop the development and evaluation of projects and plans, such as transportation improvement projects, land use development projects, system-wide packages of transportation improvements, and area-wide changes in land use. Really, the travel model is about filling the gaps of real data. So currently, no agency has traffic counts or survey data for all empirical evidence for the entire roadway system or the entire region. And so really what models are used for is to fill in these gaps to better understand what's going on. So from a policy perspective on why we use the travel model here at SACOG, we use it for the long range plan or the MTP-SCS. This is known as the blueprint. A lot of our blueprint analysis uses the travel model for things such as project screening and phasing, project benefit cost analysis. We look at plan performance metrics that come out of the travel model, such as VMT, congestion, and transit ridership. And we also use the travel model to evaluate grant applications of projects. We also use it for our Clean Air Quality Act. Does the regional plan and the MTIP meet the emission budgets? And also for SB 375 greenhouse gas reductions. Does the regional plan meet and achieve its greenhouse gas reduction targets? So not only at SACOG, but also many local cities and counties rely on SACOG's travel model to evaluate local projects. Some jurisdictions have developed their own travel models with more refined local projects and specificities that they need for their traffic impact studies. I know Elk Grove is a good example of this. They have their own travel demand model, but they're typically based off of SACOG's model. And one of the reasons that the local models are using SACOG's model is because it's regularly updated and maintained. has the latest transportation project lists, regular land use and growth forecasts. And so it's helpful to kind of continually reference the SACOG model, even if there's local models that are being used in parallel. General plans often use the travel model. Specific plans and development projects use the travel model for their EIRs and CEQA analysis. And project level analysis that I mentioned, traffic impact analysis, economic development fees, congestion management plans. These are all examples of how the travel model is used at the local level. So I went through and just looked at a couple quick last month requests for our modeling files and came across a couple examples of recent uses of SACSIM, our travel model. The city of Marysville has a general plan update, West Jackson specific plan EIR, and Q Street Sacramento crossing closure has a traffic impact analysis. So these are just a few of many types of projects around the region that are using the travel model. I think I have to double click the clicker every time. So this slide is really to peel back the hood, if you will, or maybe some transparent windows of what the travel model looks like. We've heard some folks say we've never actually seen the model. So this is what it is. On the left side, you can see there's kind of a GIS graphical interface of the regional roadway network. And on the right side, it's really a script or a code that feeds into a bunch of additional sub-modules of the travel model. So SACOG's travel demand model is called SACSIM. Our latest version of this used for the blueprint is SACSIM 23. It's actually our 6th iteration of this model. And SACSIM is what's known as an activity-based model, meaning that people's activity patterns help determine whom, when, and where people are traveling. SACSIM was also the first activity-based model to be used at an MPO level. This was adopted in 2008 as part of the long-range plan at that time. And so we're really proud about that here at SACOG. So how does the travel model work? Big picture, we're trying to predict human travel behavior and forecast the demand for the transportation infrastructure and services. As I mentioned, SACSIM is an activity-based model. And similar to a traditional 4-step model that some of you may be familiar with, but as the name infers, the main difference is it models activity. So it has a strong connection with personal activities and travel. In other words, if you think of kind of a to-do list of travel that you might have in a given day, you all had an activity to get here today. And so that is reflected in your travel. Some of you may have errands or additional meetings to go to after this. And that would all be part of your activities and travel to-do list.
The through traffic. For example, 80 people are blasted through east to west, west to east. That's not accounted for. Is that correct? This appears to be all local travel.
This interaction of activities is primarily the core of our module, which is focused on local travel, but we do also capture it through traffic. That's correct. Yes. So travel inside and outside the region, people starting outside and coming inside or vice versa, that is captured, and people going through. So if you say you're going from San Francisco up to Tahoe, we capture that as well on the model.
But does it capture 80 like, cross, I'm losing the word, cargo truck traffic, right? On 50 and 80 that's passing through on its way interstate travel. That's not interstate. Does it capture that?
Yes, and we capture that by knowing what we modeled the local travel, and then we look at what the total of truck vehicles. So we do that largely by traffic counts, the flow rates. So you can look at different databases to see where and how much truck travel is happening. And then we look at the total overall traffic counts on the roadway. So in the example of Business 80, we know there's something like typically 8% is truck traffic. And another, depending on a typical weekday, there's a percentage of through traffic, and then there's other traffic where people are coming in and out. Say they work in Davis, but they live in Vacaville or something like that. That is all captured, and we can confirm that we're capturing the proper amount of travel by comparing it to observed traffic count data.
Are you, how are you using peak flows or? During each time period, is it peak time that you use for constant, or do you do different scenarios?
Yes, so the model runs at a daily time period. This core module that I show here on the daily travel patterns, we look at 5-minute intervals, but when we model the actual travel on the roadways, we have 9 different time periods. So we look at 3 peak morning periods, 3 peak evening periods, and then we compare with total daily traffic volumes.
Okay, and then for the purposes of your greenhouse gas SCS clients, is it a combination of that you use to measure, or?
So for purposes of the greenhouse gas, specifically for SB 375, we look at passenger vehicle only. So we remove the portion that is pass-through traffic, we remove the portion that is trucks, and we look at passenger vehicles of travel within the region. The Bay Area then will do the same thing, so there's no double counting. And so our portion that we're mandated to reduce the greenhouse gases from is within the region from passenger vehicles. And then we look at that at a per capita rate.
So I understand it's vehicle miles traveled, just vehicle. Take out the trucks and you take out the pass-through traffic.
For the purposes of counting the greenhouse gas.
So here's the situation. Marysville. Not a big part of this whole thing in SACOG, but we're a part of it.
You're a big part of it.
We, oh, come on, I'm being modest for a change, come on. We got Highway 20 and Highway 70 intersecting in the middle of town on city streets. Enormous amounts of truck traffic and enormous amounts of pass-through traffic. So I'm trying to figure out how this is going to help us, because the overwhelming majority of traffic on Marysville streets is pass-through traffic and truck traffic. It is not local traffic going to work, doctor appointment, soccer practice, et cetera. So I'm trying to figure out what's this model? How relevant is it to Marysville? It seems to ignore most of what's happening there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the model does not ignore the truck traffic.
No, pardon me. Sacramento, obviously you've got an enormous amount of through traffic, and it's all on state highways, federally funded, state funded freeways. It's totally different. This is on city streets, and it's the overwhelming majority of total traffic in the town. And I don't know what it's like in Yuba City and Sutter County. It's got to be similar.
Same with 99 and 1.
Exactly.
So you are correct. We should not ignore the congestion from trucks, in particular on our city streets in the neighborhoods. And the model does capture that. So in the Marysville general plan that is updated, they will look at all types of trips, including small vehicle trucks, large vehicle trucks, passenger vehicles. However, for the SB 375 greenhouse gas reduction target for the blueprint, that's primarily focused on reducing passenger vehicle miles traveled.
That's the law. That's the state law.
So that's the statutory requirement, but the tool we use that can capture all of that, and it is capturing it for projects that you have in your region.
Kyle, is it fair to say the model is going to model all travel, and then for different uses, you will pull certain information out?
That's correct.
Right? So in our metropolitan transportation plan, we still have to model all travel because it's a requirement under federal law. For the specific SB 375 target, we pull out the passenger trips to do the specific calculator for that. So we will use it for lots of different things, right?
That's correct. Yes. Yep. These are great questions. So keep them coming. So I want to talk briefly about some of the foundational principles that is kind of the core to the model development and the planning process. This is how we're able to measure or quantify the built environment and how these models are built to understand the relationship between transportation and land use interaction. So first we have density, the number of households or population in a given area per acre or per parcel to understand the land use, to understand the levels of land use in that area. Next, we have diversity. This is discussing the mix of different land use types, how many jobs and how many houses are in a given area. Are there enough jobs to serve the people that are living there? In cases where there's perhaps a heavy housing side and not as much jobs, that might indicate a place where somebody has to travel further to their employer. Next is design. This is looking at the street design. Think of complete streets and the difference in some places walkability or safety. We can actually measure this by looking at the intersections. So we measure the intersection density and then the type of intersection. So whether it's a 2-lane or 3-lane intersection, 4-lane, and that helps us understand if it's a grid pattern or a cul-de-sac. And people tend to have more willingness to bike or walk in some types of patterns and more driving and longer trips in others. So this helps us understand how the built environment plays a role in people's transportation decisions. 2 more I'll go over. I know there could be many, but I think these kind of boil down to the five core principles. Next is destination accessibility. So what is the jobs accessibility from someone's household using a car? What jobs is accessibility by transit, and understanding those distances from the houses to the major downtown centers or employment centers. Finally is distance to transit. So is your house near a transit stop, and what is that frequency? We know that the frequency and the proximity to transit stops really determines if people are willing to use the transit system. So these are kind of the core principles that we use to understand the relationship of these variables and are able to measure their impacts to VMT. This is also the research that's built kind of on the fundamentals of how the travel model is used. We use what we call an elasticity, or it's a ratio of percent change of one variable to another. So to kind of put that in normal terms, you could think of that one variable would be what's your distance to a transit stop, and then that's the sensitivity. What's the likelihood that you might actually use transit as your primary mode choice to get to work versus, say, go in your car or walk. Yes.
I just have a quick question. Do you find heat maps in areas helpful, or is that something used? Heat maps, like
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, heat maps are definitely helpful to understand spatially all sorts of different types of patterns, like you mentioned, the different land use interactions with the transportation. I think it's a really helpful way to visualize that. So tying these together to kind of a model development such as SAC-SIM, these 5 core principles are broken into a lot of subcomponents. We already mentioned a couple of the submodules for through traffic and interregional travel. And they're broken up into really a variety of coefficients and submodules of that model. So it's really kind of, it allows us to be really sensitive to the built environment and evaluate the travel behavior on a variety of different measures. So taking a little step back from the model development, I want to connect a little bit with how we use the travel model with the blueprint and the overall planning process here. So as part of the long range planning process, we start with the regional growth projections. In the current blueprint, the region is expected to grow by over 500,000 new people, 250,000 new jobs, and 250,000 new homes by 2050. So we know that growth is going to put in a lot of strain on the existing transportation system. And so to accommodate that we need to look at transportation projects and different transportation investments to serve that growth. So as part of the blueprint process, you all last month adopted a transportation project list. As part of that, we used the travel model to evaluate over 1,600 transportation projects. In another way, there was over $14 billion of new new roadways or additional capacity. And the travel model is really one of our main tools, not our only tool, but to do an evaluation of how the land use growth is connecting with the transportation investments. We also use the travel model to evaluate how the plan's performing against the triple bottom line framework. So how are we performing on equity, economy, and the environment? So I mentioned, you probably saw in the previous slide, we had kind of 3 layers of model inputs that go into the travel model. The first being the land use. So we have regional growth projections of housing and jobs. These are then broken out by density, housing type, employment by sector, and all of their proximity to one another. Kind of connecting back to those core principles we talked about, this is really looking at the density and diversity of land use types. So the map we have here is the SACOG community types map, where we break out community types by centers and corridors, established communities, developing communities. And we also break out residential density, such as high density areas, mixed use development, or low density or rural residential areas. So our land use team here at SACOG then takes that information and they use a tool called Envision Tomorrow. It's a scenario planning tool that allows us to analyze growth patterns at a parcel level. So you can see on the slide, there's dwelling units and employment sector broken out and evaluated for the entire region at a parcel level. This is also the level of detail we use to run the travel demand model. So the next input we have is our population. So the blueprint uses the land use at the parcel level, and we primarily develop the population using ACS data, or American Community Survey data. We develop what we call a representative or synthetic population. And the 2 main data sources that go into this, the first is the PUMS data, which is a micro sample. It's a survey data set that's personal survey data. It's anonymized person level records within the region. So every person level data set includes demographic characteristics such as age, household income, and employment type. So that gets us the demographic information at a person level. And then the second anonymized person level. And then the second input is really those totals. So we look at ACS, and in this iteration, we have 2020 census demographic data to understand what the total number of people are in a given area. My colleague Kathleen shared the zones earlier. I believe they were looking at tracts. We do this at the tract level, and we also do this at the block group level, depending on the data that we're able to get. So combining these 2 data sets together, we get a synthetic population that we're able to model. So that means 1 record for every person in the region and every household in the region are able to be modeled at the parcel level. One of the benefits of having an activity-based model, say from some other sketch level planning tools or typical trip generation models, is that connection to every individual person and household in the region. And this allows us to capture changing demographic trends. So the example I have here on this slide is we know that the nuclear families are declining in the total portion of families within the region. And there's a lot more folks, adults living alone or with roommates. And this is something that would be really challenging to capture with historical models. But having a model like SACSIM, where we can model activities at a person and household level, we're able to take these demographic trends and use them into our modeling and forecasting. So the final input of these three, so those were kind of the demand side of things, and then there's the supply side. So the final input is the transportation network itself. SACSIM primarily looks at three different types of transportation inputs: the roadway system, transit system, and bike and walk. For the transportation network, we look at 22 different capacity classes of roadways. For example, general purpose freeway lanes, HOV lanes, major and minor arterials. And then for each individual roadway segment, the variables that we use to input include free flow speeds, the number of travel lanes on a given roadway segment, and then if there's any restrictions. So say a pricing restriction or a type of vehicle restriction, such as an HOV lane or express lane. Those are all identified differently in the network. For the transit network, we have three fixed route service types. This includes light rail, local bus. So local buses would have more frequent stops, and commuter buses. These typically have fewer stops, and they're typically longer distance and serve a more direct route. We also look for transit operators. The model considers what we call headways. So how often or frequent is the bus coming throughout the duration of the day? We also look at the travel time on transit. So not just in vehicle travel time, but also what is the time to walk to and from your destination from the transit, and if there's any additional time, such as say as a wait time between transferring buses or waiting for the vehicles. And that'll plays into considering if you're willing to take transit versus say walk to your destination or take your automobile.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
I mean, that sounds like an awful lot of complex data. So are you're pulling it from different transit agencies or something, what they have?
That's right. So we work with all of the transit operators to understand
That part, yeah.
what operations are going on now, what are they planning on in the future,
Yeah.
and then we go through a financial constraint and revenue process that the board went through to understand what those routes are. There was also, I believe there was the regional transit network study that was done here at SACOG, and so that's also used to understand where and how those routes will be analyzed for the future.
Got it. Okay.
So I want to walk through an example of how this works, and when we talk about this activities of a household and a person. So in this example, I have just a 4-person household, let's say two automobile household, and looking at their daily travel pattern, one of the adults drives the students to school. They then drop the kids off and go to an office. Maybe they go out to lunch with their coworkers, return back to the office, pick the kids up from school, and return home. Let's say the other adult goes to maybe a major job center or a downtown area. On the way home, they go to the grocery store and then return home. Let's say in the evening, one of the kids has baseball practice and the adult brings them there and returns home for there. So this is how we can evaluate a typical travel pattern of a household. So what does that all mean when we're able to measure how much that household traveled? In this particular case, that's 17 person trips or 11 vehicle trips or 45 miles of travel, VMT. So this is done for every household and every person in the region. And then we can measure the overall regional impacts to the transportation infrastructure. I want to stress that this particular household is one of thousands of different types of households. I shared on that previous slide the household composition, and people are shown the trends are changing, and so we're able to capture all sorts of different types of households. So if you don't see yourself reflected here, just know that you are reflected in the model itself. So we've covered a bit of how the travel model works, but before we begin any forecasting, we want to understand, is the model reasonable? I heard a great comment about models and their usefulness. I think it was earlier, all models are,
All models are wrong, some are just useful.
thank you. All models are wrong, but some are useful. So is the model useful? Is it reasonable for our planning cycle?
See what you miss on Transportation Committee? Yeah.
Pearls of wisdom.
Yep.
That's right.
Things we think about it.
So first, we've touched a bit on the model development. So every plan cycle, typically on a 4-year cycle, usually for the long-range plan, we go through an development process to ensure that, one, the model is up to date, has the latest planning and policy needs, and we're able to evaluate any additional policies. A good example of this last iteration, are we able to model managed lanes? Another one is, can we reflect the changes in telework and how is that impacting travel patterns? Next, we go through a model calibration process. I like to think of this as fine tuning. We adjust the model parameters to better replicate observed data. Here's just a couple examples of our model development and calibration in our latest SACSIM 23 iteration. New functionality includes ride hailing in the mode choice, so we can look at TNC or transportation network companies. We've incorporated telework into the person day travel patterns, so understanding how telework changes people's typical patterns, specifically commuting to work. And then we've incorporated what we call deadheading, so for TNC and autonomous vehicles. So this is where the driver may not have a passenger, but we know they're still driving around, and we know that that provides additional VMT. So we have this now on the model to evaluate and capture. So yes, go ahead. Yeah, that's a great question. So currently we don't have the capability to do on-demand or microtransit on SACSIM. One way that we do get that data. So we ask the operators how much are going there. We're able to estimate that using kind of a local shuttle that may reflect similar to that on-ride demand, but it's something that we don't currently have the capability to do.
Similar question. When we were on the Denver study mission, Dr. Cog said that they were surprised how far scooters and those, is that captured in this model in anywhere?
So so I think you're referring to like a bike share program or a micromobility.
Or a scooter, right?
Or a scooter.
So I would think in an area as dense as, well, Elk Grove, I guess, or certainly Sacramento, where folks will opt not to drive because they can get from here to the Capitol or downtown, not the Capitol, but further down quicker without getting in a car and driving. So is that type of mobility captured in the model?
So currently we do not capture the micromobility companies on the model. We do look at that. We call it an off-model adjustment specifically for our plan to understand what's the relative change that might reduce greenhouse gases or how well are these programs performing. So we do analyze it. We don't specifically analyze it with SACSIM's travel demand model, but it is something we're considering. Something we do actually do on the model is say a local scooter, and let's say you were willing to walk a mile to transit, but then you purchased a electric scooter, electric bike, and now you're willing to go a little further. Maybe you have one of the ones that you can bring on light rail. So we're able to expand kind of that willingness distance, and we do forecast that using the travel demand model.
And we actually have some micromobility data just captured separately, right, from our providers. So
That's
if
correct.
anybody's interested actually you mentioned heat maps, Director Lauren, but it actually is fascinating to look at micromobility usage where we have it off.
Yeah, and refresh me, I think as you began, you were talking about the focus and the objective of this exercise, of this modeling. And that is, I presume, compliance with 375 CARB.
It's really to
What is the
forecast, it's
objective?
to forecast travel, right? It's to, I mean, way before we had SB 375, we used travel models to figure out if we have this much growth, this kind of transportation infrastructure, right? Where do we need to coordinate those things? So it really is, it's a little bit like your question earlier, Dr. Branscombe, on, wait, I have a lot of trucks and I have a lot of local traffic. This model was actually built and is still very useful for you to understand, how do I manage
get that.
downtown areas?
I'm beyond suspicious and basically contrary to anything that the climate absolutists at California Air Resources Board require.
I'm
So,
just saying, I think the model has many benefits, right? And many.
no,
purposes.
these are good things to know.
Yeah, and one of those is we forecast vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions, but others are, we do general plan updates. We do EIRs on specific plans. We look at where congestion might be happening in the future, so it's,
We have population growth in our region.
we
The
do.
state has population decline, notwithstanding, that's net decline, notwithstanding all the inward migration of less than legal residents.
Off topic.
Yeah.
Off topic.
No, it's just that we got these
Mr. Corliss.
problems and
Mr. Corliss,
this is a problem.
can we?
I'm
Saw on
sorry.
the uptick, I think, here, can you, so what you're saying, am I looking at this right, the before and after is after this calibration?
That's correct.
So there's
We're dancing to that.
no,
I hate it.
it doesn't look like a substantial change, right, with telework and ride hailing, is that what the data is showing, right?
So what this is actually showing 2018 calibration. So this would be before we see substantial change in telework. And I'll share a little bit of information of that in the next slide. But what this shows is how our previous version of the model was performing on the before in red. And then we are able to look at the latest 2018 household travel survey in blue, understanding that's prior to the pandemic and increase in telework. And then after calibration, we're able to create a better fitted line. So in this particular case, we're looking at the primary work tour when you're arriving during the time of day for your work.
Yeah.
And this is really our calibration process to better reflect the observed data.
Okay, these are both 2018, it's not 2018 and after 2023.
That's right. And so this
Okay.
is just an example of, first and foremost, we want to reflect the household travel survey, which is a really great empirical data source. It's local. We understand demographic trends, travel behavior, time of day patterns. So that's all really rich data, but we also understand that it's not capturing things like post-pandemic work patterns. And so I listed out, we also look at California-based household travels, or excuse me, telework travel surveys. And we had a local employer telework survey, I believe by Valley Vision in 2023. And so we're able to incorporate that in our future forecast as well.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So after we get through the calibration part, then we need to validate the model. And what this means is comparing SACSM outputs with observed conditions. California Transportation Commission, or CTC, maintains these guidelines for travel models. These include a series of different validation thresholds that we use in order to be in compliance and make sure our model is validated and appropriate for use. We also do sensitivity testing. This means, is the model sensitive or reasonable change to different factors, such as different demographic data, high or low income or age, as well as different land use factors. We talked about some earlier, but density or diversity, a mix of land use. So a couple examples on this. The top left here is our speed validation. So I mentioned we're incorporating a lot of big data sources that we didn't have previously. This is looking at INRIX data we have from the NPNRDS big data speed data source. So on the blue line, you can see the average congested speed by time period. And in the gold bars, they're a little difficult to see. We look at the model congested period. And so if we're in that kind of the shaded range of a 90%, 95% confidence interval, we deem the model as validated and it's operating correctly by that time period of day. to show that there's congestion. I mentioned the CTC guidelines. This is just on the bottom left is freeway and local road validation by those different metrics. There's a wide variety of metrics and guidelines that we use, but it's typically statistical validation. Are you within a threshold in a reasonable range of the observed data point? We typically use traffic counts for that. So we've collected over 2,000 traffic counts, reaching out to all your local agencies. Some do them on a study-by-study basis. Others have cameras that can collect turning movements. There's also the PEMS, or sensor data, that we gather from Caltrans. And all of that is then fed in and making sure that we're able to properly reflect the observed traffic counts. And so that's how we know we also have the proper amount of not just passenger vehicles internally, but also the overall total volume of the roadway, including trucks and other types of vehicles. So on the right here, in this last iteration, we actually had a third-party review. We hired transportation consultants to do a sensitivity analysis. We have a report from them. This is available on our website, and we encourage anyone that's using the model for local studies to take a look at this before their use. I just have a kind of a quick example of one of the types of sensitivity tests we do here. This kind of 3D graph is looking at the sensitivity of VMT per capita by income and job accessibility. So the gold bars in the back are higher income folks, and they travel more, higher VMT. But you can also see the number of jobs. I think in this particular case, it's looking at the total number of jobs within 30 minutes. You can see that also has a factor on how much you drive. But overall, larger income earners are traveling further are traveling more by car. So finally, we review and repeat. We do this at the SACOG staff level. We also have a lot of state and federal agency review. I mentioned the California Air Resource Board, CTC, FHWA, Caltrans. They all review our models, and we go through and coordinate with them. But then I think the most important part is the transparency and local use that all of your local planners and their project teams and consultant staff, we let anyone use the model. They're welcome to use it, and we provide a lot of training and support and additional resources. And in turn, we hope if they find problems, if they have new research, we ask them to share that back with us. And that's how we're continuing to kind of do an iterative process of making this model development and reasonable. All right, so if we can confirm that the travel model is properly working and it's a reasonable model, now we can begin forecasting. So what comes out of the travel model? Kind of two main bins: system performance. This includes metrics such as vehicle miles traveled, congested vehicle miles traveled, accessibility, such as residential accessibility to jobs by driving or by transit, and then travel choice. So we look at mode share. What's the percentage of people that are driving to work, walking or biking? We can also look at trip lengths and trip purposes, such as a trip purpose would be going to work or shopping or a recreational trip. So this map is just an example of how we can compare and use the model to evaluate VMT based on transit proximity. So in this map in green, we're looking at all the people that live within 1 mile of transit stops, and in orange is beyond 1 mile of a transit stop. And when we average these two areas, we can see that the green areas on average drive 15 miles per day, and the orange areas or gold areas drive 21 miles per day. So we can see that the transit proximity really plays a factor there. Some of this is maybe they drive longer because it's further to get to a job, but others, there may be just on average less driving if somebody decides to take transit because of their proximity to a transit stop. Here's just another example looking at the mixed land use and how that compares to a more primarily a primarily residential area where there's not as much jobs. We see similar trends. The areas in the green drive on average about 16 miles per day. This is an area where we see a mixed use of land use types, so different types of employment, not just residential. And we see for primarily residential areas, on average, folks are driving 22 miles per week, per day. So I mentioned earlier a little bit about teleworking. So how does telework affect travel? We now have the capability to look at this on the model. So on the left is data from the ACS survey data. That's from 2019 to 2022, and looking at the percentage of workers who are teleworking. So we can see that this pattern has drastically changed since the pandemic occurred. And while it's lower than it was during 2021, 22, it's still significantly higher than pre-pandemic 2019 levels. So we can see how this affects travel patterns on model now. So on the right is the output of the average workers by telework type. You can see a full-time worker, so meaning that they have no commute trips. They're lower travel than a typical worker. However, there still is travel, right? So if you work from home, you're not commuting to the office, you still may have to go drop your kids off or go to the grocery store. And so those folks still are traveling, and we do capture that. A full-time worker in the middle, this includes you're working from an office during that day, they travel a bit more. But interestingly, we found that a hybrid worker, so somebody that works in the office maybe a portion of the day, and then they go home and work a bit more, they actually drive more than a worker that just goes to the office. And this is shown in the telework surveys that we found. So I think it's important that we understand this. Telework, while it helps, is not necessarily a silver bullet to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Telework policies need to take into consideration the type of telework or hybrid workers.
So this is interesting because it was the same, well, not all, I'm thinking private sector, but many public sectors started requiring the hybrid option, right? So this is ironic because it's the same entity when you keep going, falling all the way up, that we're forced to reduce greenhouse gas. So what we had when COVID originally happened was actually more beneficial, is what I see here, than this hybrid scenario. Statistically, is what I'm seeing. So, but the other thing is the validity. That was my comment. But the validity is I'm questioning is that you're seeing it from the surveys. How are you asking that question to garner they're actually traveling more? I'm curious because they're, yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah. I don't have the specific survey questions on me, but I can certainly get that information to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't need to see it, but the reason why I'm questioning is that obviously a lot of this we process through our own experiences, right? So when I was doing hybrid, if I go to work, I just went to work. When I was at home, I was just at home. So I don't understand why it would be more. That's
right. And so this is on a given day. So I may go into the office on a Monday, Tuesday, and that would be, and then I work from home Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So the Monday, Tuesday, I would be under a full-time worker that goes to the office in this chart. And the rest of the week, I'd be a full-time teleworker, meaning I don't have a commute trip. However, a hybrid worker, as defined here, there's lots of different ways we can slice and dice this. We're saying you work from home. Let's say you work in the morning for 2 hours, then you come to SACOG for the board meeting, and then you go home and you work from home for the rest of the duration of the day. Maybe you stop at a grocery store, or you stop at a downtown restaurant that you really like because you made that additional trip and you have a more flexible work schedule. That's the type of trip that we're finding hybrid workers actually travel more than somebody that works full-time at the office or works at home.
okay, fair, but I wanted to emphasize your point on maybe, because if I don't, then I don't travel more. So how do we take it? How do we quantify that as an absolute in our model? If it's a maybe, that's
so it's all based on probability.
okay. So is it like, okay, half, we're gonna assume half the people do what you're saying, half the people do what I do and not do that?
So So we ask everybody in the survey, and I can get you that information. And I should mention, this isn't our survey. It was conducted, I believe the study, it was by Fair and Peers. And then we have the Valley Vision Employment Survey as well. So we took the empirical data and the survey data and brought it into our model. That's really what we did in terms of the model development. So we can then use that information to forecast it. But in terms of your question, in my example where I work 2 days in the office,
Yeah.
and I work full time, and I work 3 days at home,
Yeah.
I have a 2/5 probability that I would fall into one of those categories. And so when we aggregate that up, you can get the probability that someone like you in your position would either be at home or working. And so we can capture that using probability.
Well, I won't belabor the point, just let me instead of driving to a restaurant on the way home because I was here, I actually am more likely to eat leftovers because I have it at home. Whereas if I'm here, I'm not gonna go home, so I won't do it. I will eat out here, right? But knowing I'm going back to home to go to work, we have leftovers there, I'm more likely to eat at home. So I'm a different maybe, and so I'm wondering how it's just very, I don't know, and it's just hard because we're relying on the probability like you're saying, but it's coming out, the way that it's coming out is
Right.
interesting to me, and we're relying.
It's counterintuitive, and I think that's a
Counterintuitive,
finding. And I would agree with you. My personal bias is I'm on Zoom all day, and so I typically am doing less travel.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily all workers across all sectors, and that's where the survey data helps us understand where maybe myself as an office worker has a bias to thinking one way, and the survey helps us understand across sectors.
Yeah, okay, maybe counterintuitive. All right, thank you.
But it's something we certainly want to look into, and hopefully, as we move forward, we'll have additional surveys, and we will update that and reflect that through our process.
Well, I was just gonna add, it is counterintuitive of how the combination of two versions that have lower amounts results in a higher.
Yeah, yeah.
It's different. I just want to make sure that I just want to make sure that we are understanding that third category correctly. It's like the first category is say you work an 8-hour day, and that one day you're just at home for the 8 hours. And then the second category is you're in the office for the full 8 hours and doing your normal in the office. The second one is you only have to go in for a certain amount of time and then you can go home. And so that's where that people are.
So it's hybrid within a day.
Within a
not
day.
hybrid
That's
within
right.
a week.
Correct.
Okay,
If you are hybrid within a day, those people are saying they travel more. Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. To your point, if you get me out of my house, I'm gonna do a bunch of stuff while I'm out and
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
That's right.
Put on
Yeah.
clothes and shoes and.
Well, that's my
Long
question.
pants. Long pants, thank you, guys.
Why model hybrid in a day and not hybrid in a week? Because most everybody's probably 2 times at home and 3 times.
Well, the model is on a daily basis.
That's right, because so what we do is we model a typical weekday. We don't model a Monday versus a Tuesday versus a Wednesday. We model a average typical weekday. And so what we have to do in that example is we use what's the statistics or the probability that you would work from home that day, you would be hybrid, meaning that day you work partially at work or partially at home, or you work full-time at work. And so if somebody says they work at home 4 days a week and work at work 1 day a week, and somebody else says 3 and 2, we take all that information together and then we put it into a probability formula to what's the odds of a typical person with your characteristics to work at home or work hybrid.
How
All
do we
right.
try to wrap
Yeah.
up at 1:25?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. Yeah, we can be quick. I think we're close. We do have a great graphical greenhouse gas illustration, so I think I'll jump over to that. So I know we've been asked, how do we calculate greenhouse gases? We've talked about this a little bit. I think that the key takeaway here is we use the travel model SACSIM to calculate VMT, and then we use an emission model that is developed and maintained by the California Air Resource Board to take that travel VMT and convert it into greenhouse gases. So we put together a illustration, hopefully kind of rolling up all of the blueprint planning process into how we get all the way to the greenhouse gas reduction strategy. So we mentioned the land use, population, and network get fed into the travel demand model. An output of the travel demand model is regional VMT and by speed. So that's VMT for every individual segment and how fast, what's the congestion level. Slower speeds and congestion typically have higher emission rates. And then we feed that into an input into the emission model. It's called MFACT from the California Air Resource Board. They provide us with the fleet type by any given year. So in our case, 2035, what's the vehicle fleet type? What's the number of electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, gasoline vehicles, and what's the fuel efficiency from those vehicles? We don't set that. That comes from California Air Resource Board to us.
The greenhouse gas, is that a per capita calculation?
That's right. You're getting ahead of me, which is great. So we get
Increasing population.
Yep.
Which would put pressure for static.
That's exactly right. So I think this was noted a few presentations back, but we also calculate, we use these models not just for greenhouse gases, but also particulate matters and air quality conformity.
For the Clean Air Act.
For the Clean Air Act, that's right. But focusing on greenhouse gases, you're exactly right, Director Branscombe, is a per capita rate. So then we look at what that forecasted population growth is by 2035. So we get a per capita greenhouse gas rate, and we compare that to 2005 levels, which is the base SB 375 target year. And that's the equation on how we can look at what's the reduction we have. Do we achieve 19% reduction by 2035 by 2005? So I want to mention and this was touched on a little bit earlier, we don't just use the travel model for greenhouse gases. There's a lot of other travel model use cases, a lot of different performance indicators, economic performance indicators, congestion management, goods movement. All of these are used the travel demand model, whether it be here at SACOG or at your local staff level and your development and planning at the local level.
And Kyle, would it be fair to say that the application of our travel model to measuring greenhouse gas emissions, that's probably one of the newer applications for us, right? Because a lot of this access to jobs, goods movement, system reliability, we've always used it for that, or for a very, very long time.
That's right. So the travel models, I think as you see them here, were developed in the 80s to evaluate congestion. They've expanded to understand policy and demographic changes and really fit in a wide variety of policy questions. But to your point, Casey, we would use the travel model to understand and forecast travel impacts, regardless if we had a greenhouse gas target or not. That's right. So this is just an example of a few other performance indicators we're using to evaluate the blueprint and how it's performing on the triple bottom line that are not just greenhouse gases. I believe this was shared in the past board meeting. So I know we covered a lot, but I wanted to leave you with a few additional resources. We have a travel demand model website. There's model documentation, user guide. We've also hosted an annual travel model user conference. Encourage you all to come or ask your staff if they'd like to attend. We really appreciate having any local feedback. And we typically post all of those presentations online. So these are all available on our website. With that, I want to thank you all for your time. I know we went over and it's during lunch. I left my contact information up here, so please don't hesitate to reach out, as well as the SACOG modeling website.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Director Branson.